And I'm an adjunct professor in historic preservation at Columbia University. I also teach at Pratt Institute and NYU. I'm delighted to be a member of the board.
Jay DiLorenzo. Not present. Kristen Herron.
Good morning. I represent the New York State Council on the Arts, where I am Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums.
Erica Krieger.
Good morning. My name's Erica Krieger. I am an Assistant Director at the Division of Building Standards and Codes. I'm the Assistant Director for Variances. I'm here representing Secretary of State Rosado in her position on the board. Thank you.
Jennifer Lamack.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lamack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum, and I serve as the Commissioner of Education's representative on the board.
Wayne Goodman.
Good morning, everyone. I am the Executive Director of the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester.
Tom Maggs.
Oh, I'm here.
Lucy Waletsky. Thank you, Lucy.
Hi, I am Lucy Waletsky. Good morning, and I'm Chair of the State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
Welcome, Lucy. Chuck Vandry.
Here.
What?
He's here.
Chuck,
I'm sorry.
I'm
sorry, Michael. I was muted. Chuck
Okay.
Vandry. I'm an archaeologist with the State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm the agency's historic preservation officer and the commissioner's representative on the board.
Mr. Chairman, we have 9 members present. That constitutes a quorum.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. We move now to the approval of the March 2021 minutes. The minutes were circulated for people to review, comment on previously. Does anybody have any additional comments regarding the March minutes? Any questions or comments about that? There being none, do I hear a motion to approve the March minutes?
This is Erica Krieger. I'd move we approve them.
Is there a second?
This is Lucy Waletsky. I second them.
Does anyone oppose or abstain the approval of the minutes? There being none, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. And we move now to the Deputy Commissioner's report by Daniel McKay.
Before we do that, Mr. Chairman, it appears that Jay DiLorenzo has joined the meeting. Jay?
Excellent. Jay, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, Jay DiLorenzo. I'm the president of the Preservation League of New York State.
Thank you, Jay. Now on to the Deputy Commissioner's report.
This is Daniel McKay. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Historic Preservation for Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. I also serve as the Deputy State Preservation Officer. And I just want to welcome you to this meeting, both members and those with interest in these projects. We certainly appreciate the additional or sort of the enhanced public participation that this remote format allows us. And we do hope we can continue to provide this service going forward. So I have some brief remarks, and then Virginia is going to call up, James or Virginia will call up some slides. I don't usually present slides during my section of remarks, but there's some interesting projects I want to share with the board and the public as well. But to get started, let me thank the review board members once again for your continuing commitment to the work of reviewing nominations put before you. A delightfully diverse slate today and some key updates on past nominations reviewed by this board that will be forthcoming from Michael and other staff. As we begin to pull out of COVID and all of the sort of state agency responses that have been necessitated to make sure our staff is healthy and safe, I just want to once again acknowledge that the Division for Historic Preservation staff have maintained an extraordinarily busy pace, really across all program areas, compliance reviews, tax credits, survey work, and National Register work, as you know, as this board knows best, the GIS and CRIS systems that we use that underpin our capabilities across all program areas, the archaeology unit, and really an astounding variety of work across the historic site system. I think I'm going to ask Greg Smith, maybe at our September meeting, to deliver a specific report on some of the just the volume and intensity of work across the historic site system. The division and the Bureau of Historic Sites are playing new roles, more prominent roles within the agency in this regard, and I think a direct report from Greg will be in order. As we near, I just want to acknowledge that as we are likely looking at the end of work from home requirements in early July, as state rate, the state rate for vaccinations is just shy of 70% right now. We do expect that most staff will seek to work a hybrid schedule, sometime from home, sometime in office. Going forward, we have absolutely proven the efficacy of that. Very pleased with the adaptation the staff has made this past year. We work very well in person. We remember that fondly, but we've turned out we work quite effectively remotely as well. So I think the new paradigm will be a blending of those two styles. Later on today's agenda is a resolution recognizing John Bonafide's accomplishments as head of the Tech Service Unit. The effective date of his retirement is imminent. We announced his retirement at the March meeting. I just want to acknowledge that we have secured agency and Division of Budget approval to proceed with the hiring of his replacement, candidates within the agency. In this case, candidates specifically within the Division for Historic Preservation have been officially contacted, and we will begin an interview process shortly. And our hire will be able to be appointed directly without delay. I mention that because that is not the situation that Greg Smith found himself in when he went through a hiring process, an interview process last spring under COVID. Greg was appointed to the position of acting head of the Bureau of Historic Sites, has served in that capacity since last June. And yet, due to hiring and promotional freezes instituted during COVID, Greg's promotion to this position was only approved within the last week. And I want to thank Greg for his patience with that delay. Certainly, he understands the situation the state has been in, the caution the state has had to proceed with, but he has worked at full pace throughout the last year. And I'm so, just is richly deserved that his appointment has finally come through. And that he now serves officially as Bureau Director, Bureau of Historic Sites. So with the balance of my time today, I'd like to highlight two projects that have been led by staff within the Bureau of Historic Sites. They represent a lot of work within the last 3 months since our last meeting. Each of these projects extols new initiatives and goals within the Bureau, the division, and the agency, as well as the knowledge and commitment and enthusiasm that so many staff bring to their work here at the division on a daily basis. So Virginia, if you would cue up my first slide, I'd be appreciative. Okay, so Pier 76, this was briefly, for about 24 hours, the agency's newest state park. But the opening ceremonies were yesterday. The agency was joined by the governor, commissioners at New York State DOT, New York State Office of General Services. We were asked by the governor's office, the agency was asked by the governor's office to undertake a remarkable transformation of Pier 76 on the west side of New York City. This is 38th Street and 12th, or the West End Highway, or West Side Highway, excuse me. I guess the Henry Hudson Parkway, official terminology. And this, if you would go to the next slide, please, Virginia. This site occupies an unfortunate space in the minds and experience of many New Yorkers. It served as the New York City Police Department tow pound. And so if you had your car towed within the last 20 years within Manhattan, parking violations, whatever, this is where it ended up. And it was not a pleasant place or experience to get your car out of Hawk. And really, it was one of the most unfortunate and grungy sites in the middle of a transformational park system managed by the Hudson River Park Trust. And so after 2 decades really of delays and sort of inaction, instructions this year for New York Police Department to finally vacate the pound. That property was then transferred to New York State Parks. And next slide, began a remarkable transformation as a new asset in our statewide park system. So the building was, our office reviewed this building for compliance purposes. It was understood to not be National Register eligible. So the agency had some latitude in how it could proceed with the park's transformation. I do think there were key design decisions made to preserve some really intriguing structural elements. And so you can see the structural steel that once supported, once was skinned with corrugated metal, the surface area on the pier. It's been a remarkable transformation. And next slide. This is an agency role. The agency, all sorts of folks were working on this. Megan Fitzgerald from the executive staff was project manager. Stephen McCorkle from the capital program was the capital program manager. And fairly late in the process, well after our compliance work was done and the agency could proceed with the project, the Bureau of Historic Sites staff was asked to develop an interpretive program for the site. And so on very short notice and with a very steep timeline, we developed, I think, 26 interpretive panels for installation on the pier. And this is this great album cover shot of Greg Smith and Lindsay Dingman and Ed Yetto and Kirsten Gustafson after our first day of installation. The slides, we can go now to the next slide, Virginia, thank you, or James. The slides cover a remarkable range of history. The latitude we were given to, in effect, interpret this site was generous, and we so appreciate it. And so the history that's presented at the site starts with the Native American history and a very honest take on that, acknowledging really the forced relocation of the Lenape tribes from Manhattan and the lower Hudson region to points west and north in North America. And next slide. It concludes, the presentation concludes chronologically at least with an acknowledgement of the Pier's history. It was a transitional, the latest update for that pier was in the 1960s, a major initiative in New York City to update waterfront and pier facilities to seek to retain New York City's role at the center as the centerpiece of international shipping. This was the transition to container shipping. This pier was built for the U.S. lines as a container shipping terminal, hybrid bulk shipping terminal. So the United States lines also includes, their passenger services also included the SS United States and the SS America passenger liners, which passed Pier 76 to dock at Pier 85, just to the north on the Hudson River. And so the history of this pier is quite unique. And because we have secured what is now the largest and heaviest artifact in the state's and OPRHP's collection, a propeller from the SS United States, we were asked to develop an interpretive panel for that component of the corporation's history. And so next slide will show that propeller along with some of the folks who were participating in opening festivities yesterday. So all of the other, I mean, there's numerous other panels. They cover the history of this site as the tow pound. They cover, it covers the history of container shipping in New York, New Jersey harbor. The Dutch history of colonial New York. It is perhaps the most interpreted state park on a square foot basis in our system. And the process, the timeline required that the entire staff of the Division for Historic Preservation basically crowdsourced this project. And so even though it was the Bureau staff that ultimately got this material into production and into its final format, we had staff in the archaeology unit, the survey and NR unit, the compliance unit, all participating with us to develop material, do research, secure images, and the time allotted, which was not, which was a tight time frame. And I can't think of a better way to sort of celebrate sort of the, if we have to work remotely, as we have had over this past year, this was a project that I thought really brought us together quite nicely. It was a great group project for us, and just sort of underscored how generous staff are with their time, with new assignments, with emergency needs. And anyway, we have had a small role in delivering an extraordinary new asset, new open space asset to New York City. The park, after opening yesterday, was transferred to the Hudson River Park Trust. And so going forward, will be operated by the Hudson River Park Trust. And already the Pier is occupied as of yesterday. The Tribeca Film Festival and their alternative programming to meet COVID requirements has a major footprint on the Pier already, with movie viewings as part of their month-long Tribeca Film Festival. So the park is open. We hope you stop by. And there's the propeller, that 32-ton propeller sitting in the background there. So next slide, please. The really big project, the Pier 76 Interpretive project was a priority, landing on top of another priority. And that foundational priority is a major commitment by the agency to update and reprogram Phillips Manor Hall. This is a state historic site in Yonkers, the major asset in the Phillips family's business dealings. This is in downtown Yonkers. In some ways, it has been an under-programmed site within our historic site system. Consistent, but not particularly high attendance. So we have been thinking a lot about the ability to reprogram this site and to enhance the interpretation that happens there. The site was the Phillips family, a business holding in their family for a number of years. Their wealth was built on the back of enslaved Africans. The family was the second largest slave-owning family in colonial America. Both during the Dutch and English periods. The family sided with loyalists and eventually was forced out of the country. And yet this manor hall remains. It later became Village Hall for the city of Yonkers, subsequently became City Hall for the city of Yonkers, and became a state historic site early in the 1900s. Next slide, please. So what is proposed at Phillips Manor Hall and what is underway are a number of things. From the outside in, the entire landscape is being renewed, and some spaces are being consolidated, some spaces are being opened up, the parking is being improved. The caretaker's cottage to the upper right in your view, that is sort of the staff offices at this site. We are renewing those offices. We are also adding a catering kitchen in support of events at this site. But the biggest change to the NR listed, the National Historic Landmark designated Manor Hall itself, is the new construction. You can see it with a faint red outline in the back corner of the house. Next slide, please. That is a new elevator shaft and new gender-neutral bathrooms on both the first and second floor that really begin to open the site up to meet ADA compliance needs, provide easy access to the second floor exhibit rooms, and there's a large assembly area on the second floor left-hand side of this photo. And it has always been difficult. This has been a difficult site to access for those with needs, particularly at the second floor level. The site has only had one stall bathroom. It just has needed this type of additional amenities for decades, and the agency is finally able to deliver them. But it is the contents, it is the exhibit updates which I'm most intrigued and excited with. We will be exhibiting, basically taking an our whole history approach to the new exhibits and content at this site. We are working, the staff here at the Bureau is working closely with consulting expertise, Amaze Designs out of Boston, Mass. They have an they are sort of internationally credentialed, have handled a number of sort of tough subjects over the years. They were the design consultant that informed exhibits out at Ganondagan State Historic Site, our site dedicated to Seneca history and cultural and history. And we're very pleased to be working with them. But the intent here is to focus about 2,800 square feet of interpretive space on a history of not only the Phillips family, which has largely been what's been presented to date, but the Native American history at this site, the African American history at this site, the experience of the enslaved within the context of their culture and achievements and labor that really was, and unfortunately, the backbone of the Phillips family's wealth. So this is going to be a fairly groundbreaking set of exhibits for the agency, and I think set a standard for exhibits, planning, design, intentions, inclusiveness going forward. This project is on a very tight timeline. The design work is completed. The bid documents, the construction bid documents were published to begin solicit interest last week. Seeker is complete. We expect to begin construction on that back elevator tower and other work to restore this property in August. And we expect to reopen this property. In effect, the construction work and the exhibit design and installation work will all be complete by June 2022. So that's in a very ambitious schedule. This is a governor's priority project. We appreciate that level of attention while knowing that that's a high level of attention to perform to. The schedule is on schedule, and staff is working extremely hard to deliver what will be a pretty groundbreaking renewal for this site and an extraordinary upgrade in terms of the thrust of exhibits and interpretation and subsequently programming at this site. And I just want to acknowledge how hard the staff is working on this piece. There may be one more slide. Is that correct? No, there is not. Okay, so Doug, that will be my report for the moment. And I look forward to providing updates on the Manor Hall project over the next 4 meetings.
Daniel, thank you so much for providing a really nice presentation about 2 very different properties that feature the good work that we are doing in New York State. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. The next item on the agenda is the Aldrich and Ray court case, and the discussion will be kicked off by Julian Adams.
Morning. This is a little bit of not really ancient history, but it goes back a bit for the board. have the court report here. I'm just getting some highlights so you can have an understanding.
Julian, you need to alter your microphone somehow. We can't
It
hear.
always happens. Hold on. Loud.
You're not muted, but we can't hear you, or only a little bit.
Hold on a second. Is that any better?
No.
You could go to Virginia or Dan's desk too.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Okay.
Julian, why don't you go to Virginia or Dan's desk and see if that's better?
This works half the time. I'll be right back.
Can't hear you.
Or come over here. Either way.
Mute. There's no webcam here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, sorry, no visual, so you just don't get to see me, but you get to hear me. Most people prefer it the other way, but let's go there. Some of you may remember the Aldrich and Ray case. It was brought to us back in 2019. It was actually nominated February 24th, 2019. It is at 1491 Niagara Street in Buffalo. The main issue there was it was large brass and metalworking company that made things like samovars and coffee urns. And by the time we got it, it lost, in our opinion, 2/3 of its integrity. So it was brought to us January 24th, 2019 was nominated under Criterion A, which is broad patterns of history. I think they were trying to understand that we had some integrity issues there architecturally. We considered it, the board considered it March 21st, 2019. This is actually from the court decision that was made. The interesting thing there, it says, at the conclusion of that meeting, the board voted unanimously to deny the nomination. Although board members Christian Heron and Wint Aldrich stated their reasons for doing so, the other 6 board members did not, nor was the vote accompanied by a statement of the board's reason for rejecting the nomination. So hold that thought there. This is something that we've never really been pushed on before. This court case may make us think about some things in the future. So therefore, we decided it was not eligible and not worthy of nomination, so we didn't send it down. However, they appealed to the keeper of the register as per their right, August 6, 2019. They went through a review there. Alexis Abernathy, our reviewer at the National Park Service, also known as the keeper's designee, the keeper of the National Register, stated, after carefully reviewing the documentation submitted on the appeal, including your letter, the draft nomination, video of the State Review Board, correspondence from your organization in the state, and the State Review Board minutes, I have denied your appeal. She explained that the draft National Register nomination and supplemental materials supplied by the organization do not counter the state and State Review Board's decision the Aldrich and Ray Manufacturing Building no longer sustains substantial integrity for listing. So again, one point is that our decision was not backed up enough for the court in why we said no, and Alexis agreed with us. Again, that's a second thought. The decision went to the Western District of Federal Court out in Buffalo, of course, this being a Buffalo property, and they looked at it. The plaintiffs were asking that the court strike the decision and order the National Register keeper to list the building. The case came out by the court that they were not going to strike the decision and make it be listed, but they were going to send it back for consultation, back through the review again. Their wording they use is something we look at in historic preservation as a very scary word: arbitrary and capricious decision making. Now, we did not get that decision. The Park Service was somewhat accused of that in this decision. The main issue is that the Park Service agreed with us and did not undertake what the court determines a de novo hearing. In other words, reconsideration afresh. Some mistakes seem to have been made in their opinion where the Park Service used our decision-making, referred our decision, and referred our cases, referred our rationale and their decision. The court said it really should have been straight from the National Park Service, and that seems to have been the misstep there for some reason. One thing that the people who brought the case did say is they said that the denial of the nomination is inconsistent with other properties in Buffalo that have had similar and often more loss of fabric, but still determined eligible. So that is one of their arguments. The court said the keeper did not, or in this case, their designee, Alexis Abernathy, did not even mention that argument, much less respond to it. Her failure to engage with plaintiff's arguments crossed the line from deficient to arbitrary. Now, those are some strong words, but they really just mean process. They're not horrible accusations or process questions under the court of law. So that's not bad-mouthing anybody there. The main case came on that the court felt like they could not reasonably discern that the keeper applied the proper scope of review or gave the plaintiff's arguments the attention they deserved, and that decision by Alexis Abernathy acting on the keeper's side was vacated. Now, go back to the fact that the plaintiff asked the court to tell the keeper to list the building. They said, no, we have process oversight, but we do not have special expertise that the administrative agency does have. So they should be addressed by the agency in the first instance. So in other words, there was a couple of missteps according to the court. Our decision, they specifically noticed that our denial was not made a clear record of, in their understanding, of the reason for denial. That's one thing. And then when with the Park Service did not undertake what was they termed the de novo review, where they started afresh in an appeal situation. That the Park Service review referred to our decision, which, according to the court, it should have stood independent without our input there. They should have looked at it entirely there. So what's happening is that the court said the decision was made on an arbitrary and capricious finding. Again, simply referring to the process, not the entire quality of our review or the Park Service's review. And we're anticipating that they sent it back through process. So we anticipate that it may be coming around for a second go for National Register listing. I'm not sure if they'll go right to the keeper or come back to us. I have not heard from the parties yet. They called me and said we won the case. I really thought they had gotten all the way to listing, and then I looked up and no, it's just going back to the process. The court sent it back to the National Register process, which is the appropriate thing to do. One thing I was very heartened about is that the court did recognize that our office and the Park Service have the expertise and not themselves. This is something I always refer to local preservation boards when they have an appeal, that it should be about the process and not the quality of the nomination or the quality of the building itself. It's about the process when the appeals happen. So it was done properly. I'm not sure we've seen one like this before. I think the lesson, I would say the lesson for me, if I may be so bold, is that when we go through that denial, it really needs a good backup why. The lesson for the Park Service, of course, is to stick to that de novo decision making there. I'm not sure our opinion will change when it comes back around, if it does come back around to us, but we'll have to make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's there. The update on the project is that everything I've read and the local media out there and talk to people as the project is winding down. So they might be done, and of course, as we in the tax credit side, which they are looking to get a tax credit for this building. When you have completed a project way ahead of consultation, and we have not had any opportunity to have terribly significant input on the design of the rehab, things could stumble there. And that would not be anything we've done. That would be the developer / owner went ahead with the rehab before a decision by the Park Service. And that's just it in a nutshell. It's like a 13-page decision, and I've tried to summarize it very quickly. Any questions or clarifications?
Thank you, Julian. This is Doug Pirelli. You did a really nice job of summarizing that. If this were to come back before the State Review Board, I mean, if the information doesn't change, our response is likely to be very similar. But is there an opportunity for them to approach this from a different angle or to add new information so that when it did come before us, it would be something to genuinely reconsider?
Well, that's one minor point in the court decision, that the plaintiffs tried to bring new information into the district court.
Right.
And they threw that out. They said, nope, nope, they were sticking to their guns on their de novo review there, that no, we have to act on the record that brought forward. So if they do, it may be that the, let's just call it the plaintiff, that's what they were calling it here, which is the alternate array development people. They may come back with what they consider new information. Our opinion may not change. We turned this project in this building all sorts of ways, looking at it, thinking about it, talking about it, doing our own research on it, looking at the plaintiff's research, and we were fairly confident in our decision. It's just a matter of what comes back we have to consider afresh.
Okay, good. So they're not limited in what they can do. They were only limited in what they could present within the context of the court case.
Yes, exactly. They can come back through with new information, and that was where the court basically said, if you do have new information, this is not the venue to do that. Take it back to the process. And that's where they sent it.
Okay. Now, on page three of the court case, there is a statement here. The commissioner serves as the State Historic Preservation Officer for New York State. The board's unanimous decision that the building does not meet the criteria for listing was based on the fact that the building had suffered a substantial loss of integrity in a 1976 fire, which destroyed its north half. Because of this, the board concluded that the remaining south wing lacked integrity of design, materials, feeling, and association, and could no longer convey the significant history of the Aldrich Ray Manufacturing Company. The fact, I mean, that's our reason.
I agree entirely. So the interesting thing, the paragraph before that says the other 6 board members did not give reasons for denial, nor was a vote accompanied by a statement of the board's reasons for rejecting the nomination. So I'm not sure what they're referring to there, or what kind of process we may have vacated accidentally. I have no actually understanding. I'm not sure where that statement comes from when it refers to in the paragraph before that we did have a statement for denial.
Right, and I think what they've done is cherry picked the fact that 2 people spoke specifically about this case.
Yes.
But when the board votes unanimously, it's based on the kind of information that's provided in that paragraph, that last paragraph on page 3. And I think it should be understood, and other people should be made aware of it, that there is reasoning behind the denial, and that we unanimously agreed to that reasoning, and that it's very well spelled out in the series of sentences on page 3.
I agree entirely. The major issue that seems, I mean, this is just like a background issue, but it is somewhat conflicting in that page 3. On page 4, they really go back and say the Park Service should have started de novo, which was apparently the real flaw. But it's just something that I'm not sure what we would be looking for. If it came back to us again for a consideration, I'm not entirely certain what we would be required to say, to tell you the truth, if we denied it again.
There's information also on page 4 that the plaintiff states, the appeal stated that the building was originally constructed in 1894 and connected to an independently standing police station located on a lot to the north sometime before 1900. The fire destroyed the police station. The original structure built by Aldrich and Ray remains. Is that an accurate statement? Not to our research. The police station did not seem to survive the Aldrich and Ray expansion in the material we were finding. It was a single 3-story building, long. It was narrow street front, long back onto the lot. Police station to the north of it. At some point, they expanded across the next, basically 2 lots, and the lot where the police station was, then another building. And at some point, they put a 4th floor on most of the structure. We could not find evidence that the police station survived inside that building. It looked like that, to our knowledge and our research, Aldrich and Ray built afresh those 2 new pieces. So that was the greatest extent of their work, of their production, and the 4th floor on the building as well. Once the fire happened, they came back to that original section, but then that original section still has the 4th floor from the expansion. So it has become yet neither the original nor the fully blown building. So we're very careful at this. You know, we try to make good efforts and good research on our own. And we were not convinced that the building as surviving was actually be recognizable as the original piece. Thank you.
Okay.
Doug, this is Michael Lynch. My interpretation of the court's comment about the board's action is that the motion to deny did not include any of the reasons for the denial. I think that if a similar situation were to arise in the future, we need to be careful that the motion to deny states specifically the reasons for the denial. It's inferred from the presentation by the staff person.
Right.
But it is not stated specifically in the motion, and I think that would address the court's comment.
Okay, so how do we, can somebody keep track of this? I mean, obviously this is going to emerge in the minutes of this meeting. It's videotaped, we can all review it, but we need to keep track of this and have a memorandum about this. And if we are to reject nominations in the future, we're going to have to very clearly state the reasons for that denial.
Kath,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I wanted to add something because it's sort of like what Michael said. I mean, why would each of you have to say, like, based on everything you heard Carrie, you heard Jen, and you heard me, and you got a memo. And so why would each of you have to say that based on all of these things, you voted to deny it? And then similarly, when Alexis got it, she also received the video of the board meeting and the memo, and she also heard Carrie's case. So perhaps her letter didn't go into, say, like the big long memo that I wrote about integrity. Maybe she should have said, based on all the evidence submitted by the state and the testimony I heard at the board meeting. But I'd say, that's her only flaw there. And as Julian said, maybe she should have reconsidered the whole thing from scratch. But I think the board's been a little fussy. Like we all spent a lot of time considering this building. You all spent a lot of time considering this building. There was a detailed back and forth between everybody. You had a chance to question Carrie. You looked at all the maps. So, I mean, it's not like anybody made a decision without thoroughly studying the building. So maybe it's just the paperwork.
No, I agree. But I think the remedy here is to state as part of the motion during the board meeting that integrity was the problem with this particular nomination.
And that you based it on what you heard, based it on like the staff report, the presentation, and your questioning of the consultant. And probably Alexis should have written a thorough letter too that repeated like what integrity it didn't have.
This is Daniel. Doug, I think you've proposed an appropriate solution here. I'm not sure this requires additional discussion. I think in what has proven to be the extraordinarily rare event of a denial of a nomination, we just need to pull language from the discussion into the motion itself. I mean, clearly our record, the minutes, the video, the preparations, the memo in advance, all substantially document. We just need to pull some acknowledgement, perhaps even of those such materials into the motion itself. And I think what you've proposed here is appropriate and doesn't require additional discussion.
Cool. Okay, thank you, everybody.
This is Wint. I just have a question about another case, which I'm wondering may follow the same course with the Park Service and with the courts. I hope not. The Cam Malt House. Is that the sort of thing that the applicants will really pursue to higher levels?
I would say no, because we approved the Cam Malt House as National Register eligible. We didn't reject it. We actually changed our opinion, I think, based on the presentation of new information, which is precisely why I posed that question in the initial discussions of this one.
I see. So they would get the credits then without dispute.
Yes.
Well, we haven't heard from the Park Service on that one yet, Wint. It's still down there.
See. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the chair's report. That's me, and we're going to discuss the State Historic Preservation Plan. The plan has been circulated in draft form without graphics to the board. I initially sent that out with a request for comments. But is it my understanding that the board's comments on the draft historic preservation plan are not due until July 28th?
Hi, this is Dan McInerney chiming in. That's correct, Doug.
Great. So, so I'll start by asking, does anyone from the board have any initial comments that they'd like to say about the plan?
This is Kristen, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment everyone on how thorough and well written it was. There's clearly so much work, so much careful consideration taken into it. It was really, I was trying to give you some critical feedback, and I'm having a hard time giving you critical feedback because it's just so thoughtful. So congratulations.
Thank you, Kristen. Other comments?
And this is Wint. I think it's remarkably interesting, very well done, and significantly different from the very good 5-year reports that have been done over the years in the past. They serve their purpose well, but this is really serving a new updated purpose, I think, very well. And I will send in some written comments shortly.
Okay, so Wint, you're happy to read the entire document and comment?
Yes, I did.
Great. Okay, so for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, it's a 44-page document of text. It doesn't include any graphics at this time. One question I have for the people who made this document is, will we get a chance to see a different version prior to July 28th with some graphics?
Hi, this is Dan again. You're not going to see it before July 28th with the graphics because it's all going over to the graphic designers and change orders are very expensive. Should we incorporate new comments? So we want to have everything ready to go. We've matched up all of the graphics we would like to see, but that team will be laying it out. We do have a modification that we're going to be working with Julian and Beth Cummings' teams to talk about. We felt we were a little short on talking about treatments. So we want to add a little bit more information in the survey designation protections section to also talk about the treatment of historic properties.
Excellent. All right, so the board is charged with reviewing and commenting on this document. We are not prepared to do that at this meeting because it's just been recently circulated. So I think what we will do is I will communicate with the board remotely after this meeting. I'm asking people to volunteer to read the entire thing or specific sections. It is broken up into an introduction, a description of the Division for Historic Preservation. There's a historic sites overview, a description of the inventory system, including the CRIS system. There's a nice 4-page section on the planning process that went into the production of the report. And then there are 8 specific topical areas that are covered that I think some of us may have special expertise in and may want to comment on. There's a page about implementation, and then there's some interesting information in the back material in terms of funding sources and contacts. The bibliography at this point is a placeholder, but there's a lot to think about. I plan to read the entire document myself, but I will ask folks to volunteer for areas of your expertise that you want to comment on. So Dan, how many comments can you handle, and are you prepared for people to add pages to this document?
Pages? Are we prepared? We are prepared to take everything in. We're also getting the comments back from the National Park Service this week.
Okay.
So we are fully prepared that you know, we have to respect the comments coming in and also evaluate them against the data that we've received.
Understood. Thank you. All right, so I'll come up with a deadline prior to July 28th, and I'll communicate that with the board after this meeting. Is everybody comfortable with that? I'll take your silence to be a yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, the only other item for the chair's report is the staff bios. Daniel, did you ever create a template for the staff bios and share that with Kristen?
No, and I appreciate those who nonetheless submitted material. So we will work what we've received into an appropriate template, and I will make sure Kristen gets what she needs to get across the finish line here.
Perfect, thank you. And then we'll be all set with that, and our bios will be up on the webpage soon. That concludes the chair's report. Any other questions or comments?
Doug, this is Michael. Did you want to comment on Paul Stewart's resignation from the board at this point?
I can mention it briefly. Paul Stewart has sent in a letter of resignation for the State Board for Historic Preservation. We are going to issue a resolution later today about that, and I will communicate with him privately about his service, and we will be needing to replace him on the board. Michael, do you have anything else to add?
Daniel, did you want to mention the governor's appointment?
One moment. Yes. So after a significant number of after a significant delay, we are very pleased to announce that Gretchen Soren, professor and author based at the Cooperstown program out in Cooperstown, New York, deep experience with the teaching of history, how to teach history, historic preservation, and a person of color herself will be joining the board effective immediately. Her Senate confirmation came through earlier this week, but she will be she has indicated that she will be available to participate in meetings beginning in September. And we are just absolutely delighted that our outreach to Gretchen, which really began 3.5 to 4 years ago, has reached the conclusion of her appointment to this board, and greatly look forward to her participation.
Yeah, that's wonderful news. Daniel, with the addition of Gretchen and the loss of Paul, how many members is the board lacking?
I believe we are still down 2. I apologize for not having that number handy.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right.
You are correct.
Yeah.
We're short 2.
Okay.
So,
Daniel, this is Wint. Delighted to hear about Gretchen. This is a very strong appointment. It's going to strengthen in so many ways everything that the board does, and will be so helpful to the division and to the agency. Well done.
we agree, and long overdue, but thank you for those comments, Wint.
And thank you, Michael, for reminding me of things to cover. I much appreciate that. Shall we move on to the National Register reviews? Oh, there's the map. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
This is Kathy Howe, head of the Survey and National Register Unit. I'm showing you a map of the state, showing you today's distribution of our National Register proposals, shown in yellow. I want to welcome all of our guests today. We've got property owners, consultants, and others, and we're so happy that you could join us today. And I'll ask that after each staff presents their presentation, I'll ask staff to please introduce their guests, and you should feel free, if you'd like, to say a few words. We'd love to hear from you. We have today 15 nominations representing varied histories, from a Southern Tier silk mill. We've got a Gilded Age mausoleum. We have the oldest extant mosque in New York City, a Hudson Valley home of a colonial era Tory, and a Fire Island summer resort community. So a very varied group of nominations. I want to thank NR staff for all their hard work on editing and guiding these proposals. And also a quick thank you to James Carter today, our IT tech support, and Virginia Bartos, as always, wonderful job on putting together the PowerPoint. So with that, I will turn it away to Chelsea Towers, who will begin today's agenda with the Fleischman House.
Okay, so to get started, we have the Fleischman House. Located in Peekskill, Westchester County, New York, the Gustav and Marion Fleischman House is a 2-story colonial revival home designed for Gustav Fleischman Jr. by prominent architect Chester A. Patterson. The Fleischman House is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an intact local example of colonial revival in which the architect, Patterson, combines elements of for multiple revival influences, including Dutch colonial, French colonial, and early classical revival. Next slide. The property is also significant under Criterion B in the area of industry for its association with Fleischmann Jr., who served as Executive Vice President and General Manager of the influential Fleischmann Company's sprawling manufacturing plant in Peekskill, New York, from 1920 to 1953. The period of significance begins with the construction of the house in 1927 through Fleischmann's retirement in 1953 when the house was subsequently sold. Next slide. The Fleischmann Company's place in history is largely defined by its transformation of American baking through the introduction of stable yeast. Fleischmann's yeast not only made bread rise, but it also was used to produce grain alcohol, resulting in gin production that is still marketed today as America's first gin. As the company grew through its advertising and diverse product lines, its laboratories developed a groundbreaking dry package yeast in the 1940s that once again transformed home and commercial baking. Unlike traditional blocks of compressed yeast cakes that had to be chilled, the new powdered dry yeast could be packaged in smaller foil envelopes without the need for refrigeration. Next slide. The Fleischmann Company's Peekskill plant along the Hudson River produced not only yeast, but margarine, baking powder, vinegar, malt, gin, vodka, and whiskey, among other commodities. As an engine that drove the local economy, it employed thousands of area residents in a wide range of professions. Next slide. In addition to his role in industry, Fleischmann served as a prominent civic leader, philanthropist, and champion of education. With the closure of the company's Peekskill plant in 1977, nearly all of the buildings were subsequently razed. The Fleischmann House remains a visible reminder of the significant role that Gustav Fleischmann Jr. played in Peekskill's history. Next slide. The house was designed according to the specifications of Chester A. Patterson of the New York architectural firm Patterson and Wilcox. Chester Patterson was a nationally prominent architect whose work and designs were included in publications such as Architectural Record, Architectural Forum, House and Garden, Country Life, and many national newspapers. Next slide. Built in 1927 as a linear plan with a side gable roof, an addition to the home in 1934 resulted in a rear-facing L-shaped plan with a cross-gabled roof in the rear. The rear of the property is terraced into 3 separate tiers of gardens, courtyards, and fountains. There have been minimal alterations to the house since its original construction was supplemented by the addition of 3 rooms in 1934, which has maintained the historic integrity of the property to the period of Gustav Fleischmann Jr.'s residency. So that's the Fleischmann House. Any questions?
Questions or comments from the board about the Fleischmann House? Nicely done, Chelsea. All right, do I hear a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion. This is Erica Krieger.
I'll second it. This is Wint. And I like the fact that we've already put their ball field in the Catskills on the register. Now we're doing a family house.
Thank you, Wint. Are there any abstentions or oppositions to this nomination? There being none, passes by unanimous consent, and we can move on to the next one. And Chelsea, please.
Here.
At least introduce him.
Chelsea, did you want to introduce the owner? Did the owner want to make any comments?
Oh, absolutely.
So I believe Michael Stewart was also the writer of the nomination and the owner of the property. He was on the line earlier. I don't know if he wants to make any comments or not.
Hi, Chelsea. This is Mike Stewart. I'd like to, first of all, thank Chelsea for all of the assistance and guidance that she and other staff members provided to me. This nomination began 2 years ago, but due to the pandemic, when site visits were put on hold, we patiently waited for time to progress, and were pleased when we were able to resume where we left off a year ago and putting the nomination forward. It's been a love of labor. We consider ourselves not the owners so much as the stewards of this lovely home. We had lived in the neighborhood for about 20 years before it came on the market, and we were able to purchase it. And we have been paying a great deal of attention to maintenance of historic details, right down to the finials that I'm replacing this weekend on the outside fence. So please know that we're keeping the home's historic integrity intact, and we thank the board for its approval of the nomination.
Thank you, Michael. That's just fantastic. Great news.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, Child Welfare Association of Mamaroneck.
Yes. Okay. So next up, I have.
Sorry, it's Erica, and I'm in West. That's Mamaroneck.
Yes. So constructed in 1926 and located in the village of Mamaroneck, Westchester County, the Child Welfare Association is eligible for the National Register under Criterion A in the area of healthcare for its relationship with the social history of public health. The Mamaroneck organization was one of many child welfare associations established throughout the country during World War I by the Women's Committee of the Council of National Defense to address child welfare needs as women began to leave the home to join the workforce. The period of significance extends from 1926 with the construction of the Stanley Avenue building until 1970 when the center transitioned to the Larchmont Mamaroneck Counseling Center, shifting focus from the specific child welfare priorities to the overall health care and social well-being of community members. Next slide, please. The Women's Committee of the Council of National Defense was established in 1917 as a semi-autonomous branch of the council to coordinate and organize women's duties on the home front during the war. They were tasked with supporting the war effort through a number of initiatives, including child welfare, educational propaganda, health and recreation, registration, and women in industry. The committee organized national programs around these initiatives, and between 1916 to 1919, an organization of 10,000 local branches sprang up to help adapt and implement these efforts at state and local levels. Next slide, please. As more and more women registered for the cause, they chose to volunteer in one of 188 services suggested by the committee, ranging from areas of agricultural, clerical work, industrial work, and education. The committee also worked to remind women that maintaining the home also supported the war effort, as it meant providing, quote, highly valuable, trained, specialized service during the crisis of World War. From this focus on home stability sprang the need for additional attention to child welfare. Next slide. The establishment of the Child Welfare Department of the Women's Committee was focused on four main objectives: public protection of maternity and infancy, mothers' care of older children, enforcement of all child labor laws, and full schooling for children of school age. To facilitate these objectives, the committee launched the Children's Year campaign in 1917. The Children's Year sought to implement social improvement by educating parents, encouraging play, and keeping children out of workforce. Although the Women's Committee of the Council of National Defense existed nationally for only 2 years, it established social welfare as a federal, state, and local concern and motivated a generation of women to continue social activism long after it disbanded. Next slide. By 1918, New York State has established 116 child welfare stations in 67 cities. Mamaroneck's first child welfare station opened in August 1918 as a result of the Women's Committee Children's Year campaign. A store rented on Mamaroneck Avenue served as the station's first site. Municipally funded, the station recruited local physicians who donated their services to weigh, measure, and examine children. In 1920, the Child Welfare Association, organized to oversee the station, reported that approximately 140 babies were registered at the Mamaroneck station. Next slide. In 1926, the Stanley Avenue Welfare Station was opened. The site served as a link between the downtown commercial corridor and adjacent residential neighborhoods. The building was designed by Charles T. Oakley, a Mamaroneck-based architect, in the colonial revival style, fitting into the architectural character of the village. On the interior, the building consisted of a simple floor plan, creating spaces for a large clinic, playroom, nurse's office, doctor's office, reception room, kitchen, bathroom, several laboratories, and a garage. Next slide. For 90 years, the Child Welfare Association has played a significant role in the civic and cultural life of the community with a long-standing history of contributions to public health. It is emblematic of a time when local government took on an active role in protecting and promoting public health. The building has seen little change over the years and appears to remain intact to its historic appearance. The site continues to function as a community health center today, emphasizing the continuum of support for the health of residents of Mamaroneck and Westchester County. That's the Mamaroneck, the Child Welfare Association of Mamaroneck. I believe Nora Lucas is on the call. She was helpful in getting the final interior images, and she's also a trustee with the village. Any questions?
Does that person want to say anything? Is there someone on the line? Mariner. Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
This is Jennifer Lemack. I thought this was a great social history and it was well done. So congratulations.
Thank you, Jennifer. Do I hear a motion?
Yes, me.
All right. Do we have a second for Mamaroneck?
I'll second. It's Erica.
And did I pronounce that better?
Yes, very good. You get a star.
And you abstained or opposed? Just a guy from Buffalo. Any abstained or opposed? There being none, this passes by unanimous consent, and we can move on to Jennifer Walkowski and Rocklin Silk Mill.
Thank you.
Wait, hold on, just one moment, Jennifer. I did want to mention that joining us today as a special guest, just observing us, is the meeting today is Alexis Abernathy. She is our National Register reviewer at the National Park Service in Washington. So a welcome to Alexis, and glad you could observe us and join us remotely today. Thanks, Alexis. We'll get started now then with the Rocklin Silk Mill. Take it away again.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So the Rocklin Silk Mill is significant under Criterion A for its association with the silk manufacturing industry in the city of Hornell during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Rocklin Silk Company was the first silk production business established in Hornell, and it served as the impetus for the explosion in silk manufacturing that led to Hornell becoming the second-ranked city for silk production in the country, earning it the nickname the City of Silk. The silk industry dominated Hornell for roughly 30 years between 1890 and 1920, the peak of which saw 6 large silk production factories operating in the area. These factories, which included the Rocklin Silk Mill, provided hundreds of jobs to local men, women, and children and combined to make Hornell, quote, the largest silk manufacturing center in the state of New York and one of the largest in the Union. Next slide, please. Edwin S. Brown brought his Rocklin Silk Company, which specialized in the production of silk yarns, to Hornellsville in 1887 and subsequently built the Rocklin Silk Mill in 1894 to house his growing business. Although the Rocklin Silk Company only occupied the mill from 1894 to 1900, the building continued to house silk manufacturing operations into the 1920s. The mill was next occupied by the Liberty Silk Company from 1900 to 1906, which changed the focus of production in the building from silk yarn to broad silks. The Steuben Silk Company took over occupancy in 1907 and continued broad silk production until 1919, when the building was sold to D.G. Dairy. Dairy's organization soon declared bankruptcy and was reorganized as Amalgamated Silk in 1923. The Rocklin Silk Mill shut down silk production in that same year, ending its association with the silk industry in Hornell. The Great Depression, the ban on raw silk importation during World War II, combined with the introduction of synthetic materials such as nylon, ultimately ended the run of Hornell as the city of silk by the mid-20th century. Next slide. The Rocklin Silk Mill is also significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture, is a good example of an industrial loft model designed to house light manufacturing processes. However, the adaptability of this building form allowed for a wide range of industries beyond just silk making to be housed within its walls after the silk business is closed. Next slide. The original 1894 factory and powerhouse of the Rocklin Silk Mill exhibit many of these characteristics, including the use of load-bearing brick masonry walls, large, regularly spaced fenestration to illuminate the interior workspace, and an open floor plan supported by an exposed structural system of cast iron columns and heavy timber beams that delineates large bays designed to accommodate a variety of industrial machinery. Although there have been some changes to the Rocklin silk mill over the years, the original 1894 factory and Powerhouse remain. These two areas house the core functions of the silk manufacturing process during the period of significance, and together they represent a good example of late 19th century industrial loft that still retains a significant level of integrity. The building has recently been rehabilitated using the commercial tax credit program. And I believe that we have the consultants on this project on the call, Elise Johnson-Schmidt and Matthew Goldberg. Would either of you like to add anything to this presentation?
Yeah, I would like to, I guess I was asked if I could add the goals of the project. So I prepared a list of those goals, if that's okay. So first of all, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and Matthew Goldberg, our historic preservationist on staff, is also here with us today. The following are Park Grove's goals for the rehabilitation of the mill. To rehabilitate an abandoned silk mill building that had a significant role in Hornell's important history of silk production. As Jennifer mentioned, and by the way, thank you very much, Jennifer, for all your hard work to bring this to fruition. It was the second largest in the country from the late 1800s until 1923, when there were 6 silk mills. It was to strengthen Hornell's understanding of its past by revitalizing an important building in the community that had been relatively lost to time and threatened for demolition. And to provide a connection for people who once worked in the building when it was recently used as a factory for the production of lingerie, which ended only 20 years ago and which still has ties to the people who work there. And to provide market rate housing in a community where it desperately is needed due to recently thriving business environment, which mutually supports Governor Cuomo's and Economic Development Corporation's investment in Hornell. And most importantly, to honor the building's history of the factory by preserving its architectural features, such as its heavy timber post and beam construction with steel columns, highlighted by revealing the structural beams in the hallway and units, as well as trusses in the lofts, which are all repainted in a contrasting color. Preserving and reusing the original existing stairways at the opposite ends of the building. The once bare floors that had absorbed the tar and dirt from over a century of use were sanded to go back to the original flooring, a process that took months and a great expense to complete. And where half of the first floor had rotted due to its close proximity to the ground beneath it, a new wood floor was installed to match the predominant species and protect it from future deterioration. Maintaining and capitalizing on the ceiling heights for light and spaciousness, and where salvageable, the original transom windows in the south end of the building were restored. And the significantly deteriorated windows were replaced with a very good aluminum-clad wood window to match the original sash, and the original exterior and the interior trim was maintained where it was intact. There are a few window openings that have been previously enlarged to create a bigger opening connecting the factory to a much later roofed over and poorly constructed addition that filled in the space between the factory and the garage. These openings were maintained and infilled with floor-to-ceiling glazing versus rebuilding them to look like the original windows. You can see that in the top right hand, where is it now? Top right hand photograph there. You can see that opening. And paying homage to the late edition that was not in the period of significance. A section of this roof, which was later covering, which is now the courtyard, was maintained at the north end of the space as a covering for approaching the main entrance from the garage, also recollecting the roof built to fill in the space in the mid-20th century. And reuse of the original location of the elevator, which was originally a freight elevator, with walls clad in tongue and groove siding, which were all reapplied or maintained in the elevator lobby. The tin-clad door in the Powerhouse, another original door that existed, is hung in the elevator lobby, and the original safe have all been retained. The original flooring of the elevator cab was used to infill the floor in front of the new elevator and runs in a contrasting direction to the original repaired flooring and replaced flooring throughout the building. Light fixtures were selected to complement the building's utilitarian use. Original steel finish found in the building and work with the same color scheme, also selected to relate to its original factory use. And historic photos of silk production and local historic images of trains that ran through Hornell were framed and installed on the entire first floor of the building to give tenants a sense of how the building had been used and some local history. The location of Rocklin silk was chosen for its location on the train line, where silk could be placed directly on the train for delivery along a river to supply water for the production process, are now very much part of the facility's interpretation, since trains still pass multiple times a day and the river is a very important facet of the site's landscape. The Powerhouse was retained and developed as 2 apartments and a leasing space. The parking garage, once a factory addition, supplies indoor parking for 17 vehicles. And preservation is a particularly important goal for the city of Hornell, given the loss of character the downtown suffered due to the bisecting highway construction, and thus what remains must be retained. I don't know if any of you have ever been through Hornell, but that highway certainly obliterated a lot of its history. And finally, Rocklin silk, being one of only 2 silk factories remaining, is now a reminder of that past history. It therefore represents a very important part of Hornell's history, and the city had planned to demolish the building if an appropriate use could not be found, which was close to happening when Park Grove, the developer, struck a deal with the city and ESDC awarded a grant towards its rehabilitation. Historic preservation tax credits were utilized and hopefully approved today so that they can be utilized. And they were key elements for the project to be able to move forward. Listing on the state and national registers is therefore extremely important. And although the building ultimately had an approved Part 1 for the building, your support of this project being in an individually listed building is critical. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Elise. All right, questions or comments? Anyone else want to say anything? Matthew?
I'd just like to thank Jennifer and everybody I worked with at SHPO. I know the project went through several revisions, and dating back to my predecessor, even here at Johnson Schmidt. So the building really means a lot to the community, and thank you to everybody I worked with.
Yeah, it looks great. It's nice to hear all the detailed things you thought about in terms of upholding its historic fabric and making changes. Questions or comments about the Rocklin Silk Mill from the board?
This is Kristen. I also wanted to underscore how the nomination and Elise, your presentation right now in really highlighting the architectural features related to the original use, that's so important. And it's great to see how they've been really highlighted. The historic images also to give that sense of use. I had one question, which is because we're seeing images of the rehabilitated space, is there any chance there were any remaining artifacts of the silk mill? You know, a loom, a piece of a loom. I was just kind of curious if that material culture had been found in the building at all, and if so, was that incorporated in any way?
So that's a really good question, and we searched high and low because we've done 2 other factory projects where we utilized aspects of the building's original components as a factory in the engraving of glass. And so in this case, the architectural elements were, we preserved every architectural element we could come up with, but there were no looms. In fact, we employed 3 people to search for historic photographs of the production of silk in the building, and could find absolutely nothing. We had the photographs that we had framed in the hallway are historic photographs of related mills in, I believe, in New Jersey, which is where the owner came from when he established this business. But we found absolutely nothing, and we will continue that search because it would be really, really nice if we could find something. But apparently, everything was sold off, and because it had so many other uses after the silk mill, they've just been lost, unfortunately. So it was recently used. It was recently called Marion Roar, which is where they produced a lingerie, and they didn't make the nylon material. They simply made it into lingerie, but by that time, everything was gone. We're looking for a sewing machine from that use that hopefully we can put on display.
Thank you for that. I realized it might not exist, but you never know.
We'll keep looking.
Yeah.
Louise, this is Daniel. Rhode Island, the Rhode Island mills were fairly oriented towards silk production, as well as the mills in the easternmost Connecticut watershed. I'll try to send you some details, but those might be two states to look to for further information.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. We will follow up on that.
Any other questions or a motion for the Rocklin Silk Mill?
This is Kristen, and I would like to move.
Do I have a second?
Approved.
Doug, this is Wayne Goodman. I second that.
Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the Bank of East Aurora building is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a representative, an intact example of an early 20th century classical revival style bank building. Next slide. Built in 1922, the building was designed by Aaron Riley Merritt, a Buffalo architect responsible for many commercial and residential buildings in East Aurora. The bank is typical of many small local banks constructed in the first half of the 20th century, and its use of the classical revival design, which helped to establish trust in the public banking system, especially after the Great Depression. This was strategically implemented both to attract customers and to demonstrate the integrity of the banking institution and recently established Federal Reserve. Compared to designs of the bank's previous buildings, the facade of the building drew on associations of solidity and permanence often attributed to classical architecture to convey the impression of a fortified, secured building. Character-defining features on the bank's facade, such as the entablature, pilasters, cornice, and architrave, help reinforce this idea. Next slide. The building is also significant under criterion A in the area of commerce as an example of a small independent bank that supported the economic growth and prosperity of East Aurora for over a century. While this building, the bank's final location, was constructed in 1922, the bank itself dates to 1882, when the Bank of East Aurora was established as the earliest financial institution for East Aurora. Next slide. In an era before large-scale bank consolidation and multi-branch banks, small independent banks such as the Bank of East Aurora were established in local villages and towns across the country to further local economic prosperity and growth. The Bank of East Aurora served the community as an independent bank from its establishment in 1882 until 1936, and its presence in the village facilitated the commercial development of East Aurora's Main Street. Recently, the building has been rehabilitated using the commercial tax credit program for use as a small boutique hotel and event center. So we do have a letter of support from the chair of the Village of East Aurora Planning Commission. And I believe we have the author of the nomination, Greg Pinto, on the call. Greg, did you want to add anything to the presentation?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that this project has been one of the most interesting ones that I've worked on for my job at Clinton Brown. I've been able to see it from its construction to its complete reuse as this boutique hotel, and several of the historic features of the building have in fact remained intact because of the owner, Todd Stein. Elements like in the picture, like you see the bank vaults, and several of the interior features have been incorporated into this new design, and it's just been an enjoyable process watching this happen. And I would like to thank you, Jennifer, for all of your help through the several versions of this and being able to get it to this point.
Thank you, Greg. Questions or comments about the Bank of East Aurora from the board? Do I hear a motion?
This is Jay. I'll make that motion.
And I will second it. Anyone opposed or abstained? There being none, this passes by unanimous consent. We will move to the next person, James Finelli, who's going to do Upsilon, and then after that, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The Upsilon Alpha Chapter Chi Omega House, located in the city of Syracuse, is a 2 1/2 story building consisting of a 1910 wood frame duplex residence, expanded twice, circa 1919, and 1941 in the colonial revival style to serve as a women's fraternal chapter house. Next slide, please. Today, the brick-clad house has an L-shaped massing consisting of the 1910 building and its circa 1919 addition at the east, and the 1941 colonial revival style expansion to the south, which is now the facade you're looking at. A hipped roof over the western portion of the building intersects with a secondary gable roof over the eastern half of the 1910 volume, and the circa 1919 rear addition. A finished attic with gabled dormers is continuous over the entire building. The Upsilon Alpha Chapter Chi Omega House is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a distinctive, intact example of an early 20th century fraternity house typology. Before universities provided on-campus housing for women, early women's fraternities often leased nearby houses in town with student rooms for rent. As they grew in membership, Greek letter organizations typically purchased existing residences, often enlarging or renovating them in contemporary architectural style. Next slide, please. On the interior of the building, a hierarchy of spaces is evident on the first floor in the west to east progression of public rooms to private and support spaces. 2 parlors, a sitting room, and a dining room are organized around a central stair hall containing a grand curved staircase with the house mother's suite, kitchen, and support spaces to the north and east. The second floor and attic level contain dormitory rooms, bathrooms, and support spaces arranged along double-loaded corridors. A large chapter room occupies most of the space within the western volume of the building. The spatial configuration and finishes of the interiors appear largely unchanged since the 1941 remodeling, retaining original features such as parquet wood floors, the grand staircase, fireplace mantels, interior doors, and built-in cabinetry. And just to explain what you're looking at here in the upper right, the photo there is one of the public spaces on the first floor. The left is that grand staircase, and then the bottom photo is the top of the staircase, and to the left of the photo, you can see the doors to the dormitory rooms. Originally located along Walnut Street, among Walnut Street residences and facing west onto Walnut Park, the building is now surrounded by Syracuse University. Despite the change in setting, the Upsilon Alpha Chapter House retains an overall high level of integrity, clearly conveying its use as a women's fraternal chapter house, and it continues in use to today, and represents mid-20th century college life. Next slide, please. The Upsilon Alpha Chapter Chi Omega House is also significant under Criterion A in the area of social history for its association with early to mid-20th century college life, and as the home of the Upsilon Alpha Chapter of the Chi Omega National Women's Fraternity. And I should note, this is the first time I'd ever heard of a women's fraternity. A brief history on that is the term women's fraternity predated the term sorority, and supposedly a professor at Syracuse University came up with the term sorority, feeling that that was more appropriate for a women's organization because it comes from a Greek word for sister as opposed to fraternity, which comes from brother. But a lot of the women's fraternities kept that identification of women's fraternity. So that is the official name for this organization. Installed at Syracuse University campus in 1911, the Upsilon Alpha Chapter purchased the nominated building in 1919 and remained in the house until the chapter disbanded in 1992. There's a different women's organization in there now, a sorority. At coeducational institutions, early women's fraternities offered security and friendship for women who were often prohibited from participating in a full range of campus social life. The Upsilon Alpha Chapter encouraged its members' leadership development through the support of a variety of social, civic, and philanthropic endeavors, including service in student government, on planning committees, and in charity fundraising. This nomination is sponsored by the Upsilon Alpha alumni and has a letter of support from the Syracuse Landmarks Preservation Board. And I believe the consultant who worked on this nomination is here today. I didn't know if she wanted to say anything.
Yes, hi, James. This is Kristen Olson. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kristen Olson. I am a project architectural historian with Environmental Design and Research, or EDR. As James mentioned, we're the consultant that prepared the nomination, and we'd like to thank James and Kathy Howe for their help and for guidance in developing this document. And I'm going to read a brief statement that was prepared by the Upsilon Alpha alumni of Syracuse, New York. That is the organization that has owned the chapter house for over 100 years. Our initial inspiration for this application came from decades of sisterhood, with members of our women's fraternity chapter house spanning several generations. These sisters survived the Great Depression, lived through the challenges of World War II, experienced rock and roll and the desire for domesticity in the 1950s, studied new college majors and saw the student protests of the 1960s and 70s, went preppy, yet embraced a wide variety of career paths for women in the 1980s, and finally saw our chapter house close in the 1990s. We love our chapter house dearly, and while the building itself has experienced renovations and redecorating during its history, it remains the one tangible common denominator between all of us. In some cases, our mothers or grandmothers were members of this fraternity, creating a beautiful and long-lasting family legacy. In other cases, our time spent living as co-eds at the chapter house created lifelong friendships. Many of our graduates have gone on to successful and notable careers. We continue to care for and maintain our beloved chapter house. We see this application as an affirmation of lives lived, of historical experiences, and of a period of architectural significance on the Syracuse University campus. Indeed, our house is the last remaining privately owned historic building on the former southernmost block of Walnut Park. Other areas of campus with individual buildings of interest, such as College Place, have lost their sense of intimacy and connection with the individual as a result of development in recent decades. Our hope in applying for National Register of Historic Places status is that we may honor the chapter house, which has been such an important part of our lives in Syracuse University campus history. Thank you very much.
Oh, what a nice letter. Thank you, Kristen. That was wonderful. Questions or comments about Upsilon? Upsilon. Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Jennifer. I will.
Do I have a second?
This is Kristen. I second.
Anyone opposed or abstained? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. I propose a 5-minute break for people to get up and do what they need to do and come back for Virginia Bartos' presentations. Okay? Take 5.
Thank you.
Hold on, let me get Burke and what's the name on the other line. Hold on. Hi, honey. I have Felicia on. Let me call Desiree. Hold on. Hi, let me see if I can add Desiree. Hold on. Hello? Yeah, she's probably, I think she's on another call at work. I can't hear you. Hold on.
Okay, I'm back. We'll wait till 11:40 and reestablish quorum and begin again at 11:40. I have 11:38.
Doug, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
This is Virginia. My two presentations are projects from the Landmark Society of Western New York. Does Wayne need to recuse himself?
No, he and I talked about this. He brought this up. He had no direct involvement with these projects and can do a good job of, considering these on their merits and not in relation to what his company has done.
Great. I would hate to have him miss out on this. So this is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great, I appreciate you bringing that up.
And Doug, I just want to say thank you very much. I'm enjoying being part of the meeting. I used to be a member of the board for 13 years, and and I didn't know that you were the new chair. So congratulations. And
thanks so much.
And your staff has done an amazing job on these applications.
Yeah, they do a great job. It's easy for me to run the meetings when the material is this good. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Doug,
Oh, absolutely.
Doug, this is Michael Lynch. Regarding these two nominations, the Landmark Society received grants from our office and were paid to produce these. So it seems to me that it would be awkward to have Wayne not recuse himself because he is fiscally responsible for the projects.
Okay.
Even though he wasn't directly involved.
They weren't grants from our office, but they were paid consultants.
Right.
And how's our quorum without Wayne?
Well, we had 10.
Okay.
And if Wayne recuses himself, we have 9 and we still have a quorum.
Then that's the direction we should go in if you think that's most prudent.
Yeah, this is Wayne. Thank you, Michael. That's totally understandable and acceptable on my end. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Doug, your 5 minutes is up.
Okay, my 5 minutes is up. We have quorum again, can I assume? And we can pick up with Virginia's nominations?
I can confirm that we have a quorum from the sign-in sheet on online.
Wynn's still here, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Virginia, take it away, please.
Thank you, Doug. Good morning. I have two presentations. The first being an expansion of an already listed historic district. That would be the 3rd Ward Historic District. It's the boundary expansion and additional documentation, and this is in Rochester, Monroe County. An expansion to the 1974 National Register listed 3rd Ward Historic District was proposed around 2016, 2017, following a survey that identified properties that should have been in the original listing, additional properties that reflected more of the ward's long history, and also to allow more property owners to take advantage of the New York State Homeowner Rehabilitation Tax Credit. As with many of the older nominations, the listing required revising to include more of the historical narrative and add missing building descriptions. With diligent work from the Landmark Society of Western New York, the proposed expansion and additional documentation has a more accurate account, accurate count of 154 listed properties and identified 149 contributing properties in the expansion area. The individually listed Immaculate Conception Church Complex, which was NR listed in 1992, is also being included in the expanded district. The two images on the right are buildings in the already listed district that reflect the high-style buildings of Rochester's former quote-unquote ruffled shirt neighborhood. The rest of the images in this presentation are of the expansion area. Next slide, please. Several of these older nominations leave us wondering as to why buildings were left out in the first place, case in point being these two buildings on the north end of South Washington Street. And yes, they are being added to the expanded district. Next slide. Buildings on the right side of this slide show the west end of Adams Street, and the top right is the west end of Atkinson Street, two primary streets. The expansion is significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture, as the buildings display the same range of architectural styles and level of integrity as seen in the listed district. The buildings are more modest and reflect socioeconomic diversity. The expanded district is also significant in the area of ethnic heritage African American. Mount Olivet Baptist Church, seen in the lower right, is a 1926 Gothic Revival church and one of the contributing buildings in the expansion area that was founded by the Third Ward African American community and is still an active congregation. Next slide, please. The Third Ward has always had an African American presence since Colonel Rochester settled in the area with enslaved members of his household. The later practice of redlining limited blacks to certain areas of Rochester, one of them being the Third Ward. Clarissa Street in the ward's west and south sections became a center of black society with a number of black-owned businesses opening on or near Clarissa Street. The upper image shows the last vestiges of this history as Clarissa Street was decimated by mid to late 20th century urban renewal. The building on the left was built as a store and in the 1960s became a jazz club. The building on the right is the former Elks Club that also functioned as an important community meeting center. The lower image shows a view looking north along Clarissa Street from Waverly Place with a 1968 affordable housing complex on the right, just one of the visible impacts of urban renewal on the Third Ward. Next slide, please. The extreme south end of Clarissa Street has several turn of the 20th century residences, seen in the top two images. Images below show Hubble Park, just north of Clarissa Street. The later development of these streets coincided with an increased demand for housing that was met by developers using the same builders or similar house plans along the newly opened streets, and it's pretty visible in these images. Next slide, please. To add to the Criterion C argument, both the listed and expansion areas of the Third Ward contain row houses, a rare building type in Rochester. The mid-19th century row house in the lower image is located at the corner of Glasgow and Gregg Streets, not too far from Plymouth Park, seen in the upper slide. The park, now known as Lunsford Park, is an oval park that was improved in 1893 by Olmsted, and Elliott, that included redesigning pathways, new cement walks, seating, trees, shrubbery, and flower beds. A 1977 redesign by Carroll Johnson and Associates included new benches and a platform for a late 19th century gazebo, which was moved from the downtown St. Joseph's Church site. Next slide, please. The Third Ward is one of the oldest neighborhoods that retains its mostly residential character and has the most to say about an area of the city that was directly affected by economics and shifts in population since the early 19th century settlement days. After much discussion, we are extending the end date of the period of significance to 1977, which will allow us to include school number 3 as contributing to and adding its history to the civil rights urban renewal discussion. After conferring with our NPS reviewer, Alexis, the subcategory of civil rights is being added to Criterion A social history. And we will ask the nomination authors for additional text specific to the topic to be added to the nomination. We humbly request that the board approve this nomination with the condition that it will be forwarded to Washington with the added narrative. Questions, comments? Alexis?
So the gazebo and the park modifications are now contributing because of the extension of the period of significance to 1977?
Yes, if we do that. The main mover for that is school number 3. we really need to add that important history to this particular nomination because it was a significant property organization for the community. And now the brutalist architecture would fall within that, and we would be able to include this. And it all falls into that civil rights narrative. Yeah, the gazebo would then become contributing. It is a historic gazebo. It was from St. Joseph's, which St. Joseph's burned, and then they moved it. And there are a couple of other things too that would flip to contributing. So just a few minor things, but we really do need to add more of that civil rights narrative, and that's what we're going for.
Would the board have an opportunity to read and comment on that before it goes anywhere else?
If the board requests it, I think that would be yeah.
Maybe just give us a crack at that. How extensive do you think the modifications are going to be versus what we saw?
Not too much.
Okay.
Virginia, this is Wynn. Do we know from the record why the earlier district was so limited?
No, and with those earlier ones, it's hard to tell. You know, that's 1974. This is relatively new. I do know that sometimes things were left out because of owner objection. If they were on the edges, they just wrote them out. I really can't tell you because there's nothing surviving in the record that says why things were done. But now it's time to fix this, to improve it, and to recognize more of the Third Ward and its importance to the city of Rochester.
Well, Billy Harrington was not shy about taking major projects, so it kind of surprises me.
Well, certainly the addition is harmonious with the original, and it's a good write-up, and it holds together very well with the addition of the 1977 bookend at the modern period of significance. Other questions or comments about Third Ward?
Doug, this is Wayne Goodman. I just wanted to add, for those that may not know, the Third Ward in Rochester was really the epicenter of Rochester's early preservation movement. This is a very charming district. It still really serves to showcase preservation's role within neighborhood revitalization, and it also has leveraged extensive interest and investment in our downtown. I just want to say thanks to Virginia for all of your work and helping shepherd this through. Thanks, everyone.
All right, do I hear a motion for the Third Ward Historic District Boundary Amendment?
This is Carol, so moved.
Second? I will second it happily. Any abstaining or opposed? Wayne?
Doug,
Wayne abstains?
Yes.
Doug,
yes.
I just wanted to, for clarification for the record, is the board asking to, obviously you were just approved, but are you asking to review the revised nomination before we send it on to National Park Service? Is that something you wanted to put
if
into that motion?
If it's logistically manageable, yes. If it causes a problem or a delay in its processing, then no.
No, not at all. So we'd be happy to do that. So we'll
just give us a day with the new information.
Well,
so the parliamentarian in me asks Carol, who made the motion, if she would amend her motion to include that.
So done.
Okay.
All right, so the motion is to approve with the understanding that there are going to be additions to the nomination form that the board will have an opportunity to review.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah.
And Doug is the second?
I am the second. Carol is the first. Wayne is abstaining. Any other opposition or abstention? There being a quorum, the motion carries.
Thank you very much.
All right. On to St. Mark's.
Yes. Next is St. Mark's Episcopal Church and Cemetery in Leroy and Genesee County. Significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture, St. Mark's Church is an excellent example of a mid-19th century Gothic revival ecclesiastical design by renowned Rochester architect Andrew Jackson Warner. The church was actually established in 1817, and a church was built in 1826 on the appropriately named Church Street, a short distance north from East Main Street. A burial ground was laid out next to the church, being the second in the new community of Gansons, later renamed Leroy. After deciding to build a new building, St. Mark's relocated to East Main Street in 1868-1869, where they were able to reuse a foundation from an old mill on which to construct the new limestone church. Next slide, please. With a few minor exceptions, the interior is largely intact to its 1869 period, with Gothic features such as a high plaster ceiling with wood moldings, wood hammer beams with decorative corbels, arched window openings with Grisal stained glass, arched doorways and doors, and a Gothic arched chancel. Wood pews also have scrolled armrests and Gothic arches on the sides. One memorial window in the nave is signed by W.H. Meyer's studio of Buffalo, New York, and the rest are believed to be from Meyer's studio as well, as they are the same age and type. Next slide, please. Comparing the historic image with the current view shows that the chancel is largely intact. The baptismal font is now east of the chancel. A wood handrail was installed in the center of the steps, and the walls are now painted white, and those are the only changes that I could notice. The pews, seating, wood paneling, and high altar are all original. The St. Mark's stained glass window in the chancel was designed by the Right Reverend John Barrett Kerfoot, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Pittsburgh. He was bishop between 1866 and 1881, and is believed to have been produced by J&R Lamb Studios of New York City, a well-known 19th century church stained glass studio. The main figure is St. Mark, on the right receiving divine inspiration to write his gospel. The lion at his feet is the symbol as the Lion of the Gospels. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the nomination, the lower tower room was made into a chapel with a columbarium in 2007, but retains an original window and moldings, wainscoting, and an archway, and that is seen in the upper right. The lower left image shows the main entrance to the nave through the south vestibule. Next slide, please. Here are views of the Canon Plumlee Parish House. By the way, Canon Plumlee, Canon is his title, not his name, okay? So Canon Plumlee Parish House, added circa 1955 on the north side of the building. The sloping landscape allowed the Leroy architect Ivan Cromwell to design an office portion that was compatible with the 1869 church, with the rest, well, that was faced with limestone, and the remaining building was essentially hidden from street view and could be more economically constructed of concrete block. The lower left image shows a view of the three-story parish house and west elevation of the church viewed across from the creek. Next slide, please. The new parish house allowed for more space for offices, meetings, Sunday school, and fellowship. As you can see, the interior reflects its date of construction. The image in the upper right, you can see one of the bands of windows. And then the large photograph shows a mid-20th century staircase. Next slide, please. Well, before I end my talk, I need to mention the cemetery. It was established when the first church was built, as you can see on the left, and is a classic settlement era burial ground laid out in rows. Most markers tend to be slab-style gravestones, and several are of limestone. A handful of obelisks mark family plots, but most families are interred together in rows. Markers contain just inscriptions, and some have been replaced due to deterioration, and those are mentioned in the nomination. No longer contiguous, the church and cemetery have separate periods of significance, with the church reflecting its dates of construction of 1868 to 1958. The cemetery's period of significance is 1826 to 1910, marking its use as a burial ground. I should mention that the church is a recipient of a sacred sites grant, which requires that the church get listed on the registers. Before I take questions or comments, I would like to introduce Dennis Melander from St. Mark's Church. And Dennis, do you want to add anything to this presentation?
Yes, thank you, Virginia. I'd like to thank you for all your help with this application, and also for Wayne Goodman and Cynthia Hauk of the Landmark Society of Western New York. As Virginia just mentioned, our application for the National Register made possible a $10,000 matching grant from the Sacred Sites Foundation. The major portion of this grant is for the restoration of the frames and the storm windows protecting the beautiful stained glass of the church, and also restoration of the colonnettes that flank the exterior doors. The congregation and the community of Leroy have raised an additional $25,000 for this project. And the project at this point is about 20% complete, so we're well underway. On behalf of St. Mark's Church, I'd like to thank you for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Virginia, is the cemetery part of this nomination, or did you just reflect on that?
The cemetery is part of the nomination.
Okay, so what's the overall period of significance for the combined properties?
Well, since the church is mostly significant under criterion C, we're going with 1868 to 1958 because that is the building as it is. But the cemetery itself, it was established in 1826 when the first church was built, and its last interment was 1910. So we're going with that for that period of significance. And because we've got these two properties, we will have two periods of significance.
Okay.
There is an association between the two of them, but we can't say 1826 for the church because that
Understood.
church building is no longer around.
Is any of the fundraising that's happening geared towards the rehabilitation of the cemetery?
I think their fundraising it's for the Sacred Sites grant. I do have to mention, even though the church owns the cemetery, it's the village that very nicely is maintaining it, doing the mowing and any of the maintenance on the property.
Other questions or comments from the board about St. Mark's Church and Cemetery? Roy.
This is Wynn. I'll happily move the nomination.
Do I have a second? I will second.
Sorry, it's Erica. I will second. Took me a minute to unmute there.
Yeah. Okay. Erica is the second. Any abstained or opposed?
This is Wayne, and I abstain.
Any opposed? There being none, the motion passes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nicely done. All right, moving on to our next set of nominations by Jennifer Betzworth and point of words.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, sorry, it's Erica Krieger. With the abstention, we still have a quorum?
Yes.
The proper numbers, thank you.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to start off here with a spectacular district here in Point of Woods. The Point of Woods Historic District is significant under criterion A in the area of social history for its association with the Chautauqua movement, as well as the area of entertainment and recreation as a private resort development on Fire Island. It is additionally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture for its unusual plan for a Fire Island community and for its collection of buildings that reflect regional resort design and architecture during the 19th and 20th centuries. Next. The historic district encompasses the full extent of the original 19th century Chautauqua resort and the private beach community that developed during the 20th century. Point of Woods remains a private summer community with no public access or services. Next. The Long Island Chautauqua Assembly Association, in collaboration with a group of Methodist ministers from Long Island, founded the Chautauqua at Point of Woods in 1894. The community's plan, which is distinct from the grids elsewhere on Fire Island, dates from this period. It features a broad main thoroughfare defining the community center, residential areas at the edges, and a central wooded park. Next. There we are. The Chautauqua initially attracted thousands of daily and overnight visitors to enjoy a variety of educational and recreational programs, but failed financially due in part to competition and the challenges of transporting people and supplies to a barrier island. Next. While the Chautauqua period was relatively short, a number of buildings do remain from this period in the community. Most were simple stick-style structures with rectangular plans. Cottage 68 in the upper corner was built in 1894 for Charles Sanford, the secretary of the Chautauqua. It is the grandest and clearest example of the Queen Anne style in Point of Woods. Next. On May 31st, 1898, the Point of Woods Association took over management of the property and its income-producing buildings and sought out members. The association maintained much of the culture established by the Chautauqua. It constructed some cottages for rent and invited members to take on 99-year leases and build private cottages. Next. In its campaign to attract investors, the association built a series of improvements, including a new shingle-style entrance shelter. Cars were never introduced to the island for personal transport. The trolley tracks were installed by 1920 and run from the ferry dock to the club freight area. Next. After the association was created, new buildings tended to be more substantial and highly designed. The association also focused on creating or improving community buildings, including the church and the casino. The use of shingle cladding became nearly universal during this period. Next. Designed in 1905 and located at the heart of the community, the church is the district's best example of the shingle style. The centrality of the church and the community's original rules for general conduct reflect Point of Woods' Chautauqua origins. Next. As the resort became more established, lessees began to build grander, higher-style cottages. Bungalows, which suited younger and smaller families, were also popular in the early 20th century. Next. Recreation was an important part of the community's culture from the beginning. Swimming, sailing, walking, and tennis were especially popular. The Yacht Club was established in 1898, and this building was constructed for it in 1929. Next. The post office, along with most other community buildings, is located on Point of Woods Avenue, the community's central road. And I just had to include this postcard because you can really see the vibrancy of the community, and bicycles and wagons are still an important part of transportation within the community today. Next. Due to the early connection of the Women's Christian Temperance Union with the Chautauqua, Point of Woods is associated with women who are prominent in education, women's suffrage, temperance, and social activism. Perhaps the most influential was Lily Devereux Blake, an author, journalist, and activist who served as president of both the New York State Women's Suffrage Association and the New York City Women's Suffrage League during the late 19th century. Next. Point of Woods' last major period of historic growth occurred during the post-war era, in large part due to the need to replace cottages after major storms. Lewis Skidmore of Skidmore Owings in Merrill owned a cottage at Point of Woods and was responsible for the design of the Minister's Study and Cottage and a dormitory for the association during the 1940s. The mid-1960s saw a final wave of construction led by architect John Milnes Baker of modernist shingle-clad homes with large glass windows and contemporary plans. Next. Point of Woods remains a vibrant and architecturally distinctive summer resort due to the vision of its founders to be a self-governing body guided by the principles of the Chautauqua movement, its location, and the strength of its community. The draft for the nomination was prepared by the Point of Woods National Register Application Committee, and I do have a few guests on the call today. Janet Hurley, the president of the Point of Woods Association, Lisa Bedell, the head of the committee, and Elizabeth Cannell, an active member of the committee. I believe there may be some others. Janet, did you want to speak on behalf of the nomination?
Thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, I'm the president of Point of Woods Association, and I have to say it's an honor to be here today and to be among people who love history, because Point of Woods is a community that loves history. The first history of our community was written in 1927 which was only 33 years after our founding. One of our community members, Henrietta Prentice, whose story is included in our application, took it upon herself to write a short treatise entitled The History of Point of Woods. Looking back on this 127 years later, since the founding, it's remarkable to me that almost 100 years ago, we already understood that our story was worth preserving and telling. We're fortunate that in 1948, on the 50th anniversary of the formation of Point of Woods Association, William Griffin wrote a 16-page history he titled The Genesis of Point of Woods Association. In it, he recounted how he and a handful of friends had created Point of Woods Association out of the financial wreckage that had been the Long Island Chautauqua Assembly Association. Griffin clearly understood that the story should not be let to die when his generation passed on. It wasn't until 1991 we officially organized a historical society, but their mission includes preserving and recovering the written and pictorial history of Point of Woods. Today, the Historical Society provides valuable assistance maintaining the archive of our historic documents. But perhaps the greatest gift of all was the work of community members Natalie and John Montgomery, who in 1995 painstakingly documented the history of every house in Point of Woods. When it was built, who were the owners. Their work, which we affectionately refer to as the Cottage Book, was the fundamental building block as we prepared our application for consideration as a historic district. In a way, it's not surprising that we have this rich historical record because for us, history is personal. We're a very tight-knit community and people seldom leave. We have at least one family that has been here for 7 generations. As I learned during the application process, the lack of automobiles in our community is a unique factor that has allowed our architecture to retain what would now be considered an old-fashioned relationship between public and private spaces. This orientation and openness to public spaces creates a virtuous cycle where our community remains close-knit, and that closeness feeds our love of history and preservation. Volunteerism and service to community are a way of life for us, so it was not hard to create the committee that prepared this application. I want to thank Lisa Bedell, the chair, as well as Elizabeth Cannell, Bruce Gillespie, Lisa Kiernan, Scott Lethbridge, Emily Tywer, among others who prepared this application. And of course, we can't thank Jennifer enough for her help and wise counsel during this process. I can only describe the work that you have done as a gift to our community and to everyone who loves history. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet. Very nicely said.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to say about the nomination before I ask for questions from the board?
This is Wynn. I think it's a fascinating story. I wonder what happens at the expiration of the 99-year lease for these lessees.
They're renewable, and in fact, because the community is 127 years old, they have expired and been renewed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments from the board for point of order?
This is Kristen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet, for your presentation as well. And certainly the impact of no automobiles on the architecture was, really interesting. I also just have to say, as someone who resides on Long Island, I was unaware there was a Chautauqua retreat ever on Long Island. So hearing that, and then hearing how even that short term, the short time that existed and how it really impacted the development of this community and the architecture, that was really fascinating. So I appreciated reading it.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Wayne. I'll make that motion.
Kristen?
I'd second it. This is Wynn.
Wynn has the second. Any opposed? Abstain. Yeah, he beat you to it. Okay, there being none, it passes by unanimous consent. And we can move on to Peter Sander.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so we're moving north to Columbia County. This is the Peter Sander Van Alstyne House, which is locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as a good example of regional domestic architecture in Columbia County that demonstrates the transition between New World Dutch and English-derived building practices in New York's Upper Hudson Valley. Next. Erected in the mid-1700s for Peter Sander van Alstyne, the brick masonry house reflects the blending of regional Dutch and English building traditions, which are expressed in its form, facade configuration, construction technology, and floor plan. Next. Van Alstyne's occupancy of the house was fleeting due to his loyalist leanings. He ultimately relocated to Canada, where he became a noteworthy figure in the settlement of Ontario. This aspect of the house is well documented and is an interesting addition to the nomination. Next. The house remains largely as it was built during the 1770s. Next. Except for some 19th century updates, including federal mantelpieces and a later staircase. Next. The reworking of the staircase inadvertently resulted in the preservation of a painted wall decoration, which you see there on the right. This compares with similar survivals in the Kinderhook area produced between 1789 and 1810. Next. The draft for this nomination was completed by Ruth Pawanka, the Village of Kinderhook historian, and we do have a letter of support from Kathleen Egan Johnson, the Town of Kinderhook historian. Are there any questions on this nomination?
Do I hear a motion to approve?
Yeah, this is Jay. I'll move it.
Do I have a second?
This is Kristen, I'll second.
All right, Kristen got the second that time. Any opposed or abstained? Carries by unanimous consent. Thank you. And moving onward.
Thank you.
Yes.
One more for you today.
Yeah.
This is the Gallatin Reformed Church and Cemetery, and it's locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture. The Meeting House is a good example of 19th century religious design in rural Columbia County, and the associated parsonage and church hall both retain integrity to their historic appearance. The cemetery is additionally significant under criterion A in the area of settlement as a record of Gallatin's early settlers. Next. The nomination includes 3 contributing buildings, the 1824 Meeting House, the 1803 parsonage, and the 1938 church hall. The congregation was organized circa 1748 as the Greenbush Dutch Reformed Church, though it was commonly referred to as the Vetter Church for its well-known pastor, Reverend Herman Vetter, who served the congregation from 1803 to 1864, which is really remarkable. The church is particularly notable as the mother religious organization, which spawned congregations in adjacent towns. Next. The Meeting House remains an outstanding example of the Wren Gibbs type Protestant meeting house, which was popularized as an American religious form by Asher Benjamin during the early 19th century. It retains the character-defining traits of the type, including its rectangular footprint, interior configuration, articulation of separate lower and upper windows, gable front, and prominent multi-stage tower straddling the roof ridge. Next. The building largely survives as dedicated in the mid-1820s, except for the 1872 installation of a large pipe organ, which required the construction of a rear addition and modifications to the liturgical center, and a more recent 1950s alteration that physically separated the ground floor pews from the upper gallery seating in the interest of heat conservation. That's what you're seeing with that arched ceiling there. And on the next slide, you can see there on the right that the second floor gallery does remain intact, the knee walls and the benches, and that arched vault would be pretty reversible if there was a desire to do so in the future. You're also seeing there the original faux grain painted doors between the vestibule and the sanctuary. Next. The roughly 3-acre cemetery was established before the American Revolution, reflecting the early part of the congregation and town's history. The cemetery contains the remains of church leaders, including Reverend Vetter, and members of many prominent and early settling families in the region. It is the largest and one of 2 oldest cemeteries within the town of Gallatin. Next. And that is the Gallatin Church and Cemetery. The draft for this nomination was completed by Bill Krattinger. This is one of those last projects that he's wrapping up for us. Are there any questions on this project?
Could you go back to the heat shield?
Mm-hmm.
What was the date of that installation?
The 50s.
Wow.
And I think it's really well done, all things considered.
Yeah. But a major change to the interior view of that
Definitely.
structure, and reversible.
Mm-hmm.
And so the columns are specifically associated with that?
If you go back to the interior, the columns predated that.
Okay, okay.
So
Well,
what
they're
you're
holding up
seeing
this.
underneath the arch is the gallery itself.
Right.
So the horizontal, boards there, that's all the gallery. It's really
Right,
just
right.
those tiles in the
Yep.
archway that were added.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Wynn. I'll move it.
Do I hear a second?
Erica, I can move this, Erica Krieger.
Any abstain or opposed? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just have a question. You said that separation was done in the 50s?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that it was so far before the fuel crisis of the 70s.
Yeah, before the energy crisis.
Before the energy crisis, and everyone's paying attention to heat loss and all of those things.
Yeah, that's our understanding from the congregation. So it must have just been drafty enough and the congregation small enough.
Exactly.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on to Linda Mackey.
All right, good afternoon. The first of my 4 nominations, Chevra Torah and Shiradishkowitz in Brooklyn, currently known as St. Timothy Holy Church, is eligible for the National Register under Criterion A in the area of ethnic heritage for its association with the Eastern European Jewish immigrant community in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn. The synagogue's construction in 1922 corresponds with Brownsville's growth in the early decades of the 20th century as the location of one of the largest settlements of Eastern European Jewish immigrants in the United States. Next slide. Chevra Torah is also eligible under Criterion C in the area of architecture. It remains an intact and representative example of Italian Renaissance synagogue architecture designed by local Brooklyn architect Edward Adelson. Although the sanctuary space is currently in fragile condition, the former synagogue retains a relatively high degree of physical integrity, and it continues to play a similar role in the religious and social life of the area's African American community as the St. Timothy Holy Church. The period of significance is 1922 to 1965, encompassing the date of construction to when the building was sold to a new congregation. Next slide. Chevra Torah was an Orthodox synagogue established in 1922 by the merger of 2 existing congregations and became a significant institution in the neighborhood. Contemporary newspaper articles confirm that the synagogue was the largest in Brownsville at the time, and according to former residents, the building was one of the most beautiful synagogues in the area. Unlike Edward Adelson's other synagogue designs that reflected the more popular classical revival style, the design for Chevra Torah was inspired by Italian Renaissance characteristics, including the emphasis on the base through the use of rustication and a prominent bell course, the rusticated pairs of pilasters, and the contrasting round arched openings with straight-headed openings. The building's interior retains the Italian Renaissance-inspired design features, including the marble stairs and balcony, and applied panel boxes on the walls in the vestibule, as well as the round arched entry portals into the sanctuary. Next slide. Notwithstanding changes made to the original doors and windows and the deterioration evident in the sanctuary, the former synagogue remains a relatively high degree of physical integrity to the period of significance. The exterior remains intact and without alteration, along with the bulk of its character-defining features. Inside, the original spatial configuration is largely unaltered, and the building's principal interior space, the sanctuary, retains its 2-story volume, 3-sided balcony, corresponding vestibule balcony, and many decorative treatments. Notably, much of the Jewish iconography and original details are still present in the building. The congregation continues to be a focal point in the community and is working to raise funds and seek grant opportunities to make further repairs to the building. This is a Columbia student draft. We received a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, And we also have a few guests with us today, representatives of the St. Timothy Holy Church. We have C. Tinette Span, Pastor Matthew Burke, and Felicia Stevens. I'm not sure who would like to go first, but I give you the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, board. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity, the consideration for the landmark, the nomination. I just wanted to share that I've been a part of this building in itself when my grandmother, Bishop Mary Louise Span, acquired the building in 1964. I was pretty much born and raised in this church at 52 years old now, carrying the responsibility of restoring, helping to restore, other than my grandmother's vision, the beautification of this building. If some people will look at these pictures and see the demise and the decay over time. I see myself as a little girl, so much history throughout this church. So many people have come through this building. This building in itself is so significant and would be in itself, once restored, if and when it is restored, something of pride for the community. We have since 1970 up until today have served the community with our food pantry, educational resources, the likes of Ben Vereen, Mike Tyson, Ella Mitchell, my grandfather, who is the founder of the Brooklyn All-Star Gospel Quartet, have come through this building. And because of the position that it's in the particular community, it allows itself to be a major resource. And I want to hopefully have this building restored so that we can continue to be so for the community. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, the attention, and thank you. Felicia Stevens will be declining to speak.
Do we have another guest speaker? I'm sorry. No? Okay, questions or comments from the board? Do I have a motion to approve?
This is Carol, so moved.
I will happily second this. Any abstained or opposed? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Linda.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Tom.
All right, next, we have the Muslim Mosque and associated caretakers residence are significant at the local level under Criterion A in the areas of social and ethnic history. Beginning in 1931, the nominated property served as the center of social and religious life for the Lucca Tatar Muslims in Brooklyn, and the activities it sheltered provided assistance to the ethnic community by easing new immigrants' transition to life in the United States. The building was constructed in 1886 to the designs of local architect Oscar Doolittle for the Second Methodist Episcopal Church, and the building still retains some of the modest Italianate and Gothic Revival design elements. The adjacent two-story residence was also constructed in 1886 to serve as the parsonage. It later became the Gospel Mission Church, then the 13th Assembly District Democratic Club, who then sold the building and adjacent residence to the American Muhammad Society in 1931. The society was the successor organization to the Lithuanian Tatar Society, formed in 1907. The organization later changed its name to Muslim Mosque, Inc. in 1963, which remains its name today. Next slide. Lucca Tatars are the descendants of an ethnic community that settled in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania at the beginning of the 14th century. Little has been written about the Tatar immigration to the United States. Research suggests their emigration to the U.S. was to escape violence against religious minorities, but the promise of opportunity and the American dream have also been a motivation. Muslim Mosque is the oldest extant mosque in New York City and is the first permanent place of worship for the American Muhammad Society, one of the oldest Islamic organizations formed in the United States. The mosque is a historically significant resource that chronicles the Tatars' history and serves as a connection between the community they established in the U.S. and that located in Lithuania, Belarus, and Poland, from which the Tatars immigrated. The Muslim mosque resembles mosques located in that area of Europe as intended by its members and creates a direct heritage link with Tatars living in Europe. Next slide. Upon acquisition of the mosque, aesthetic alterations were made on both the exterior and interior of the building. These changes adapted the church to serve the practical needs of the congregation, but they also were intended to create an aesthetic connection to mosques in the homeland, which were typically square plan wood buildings with a hip roof and cupola. The original pointed arch multi-pane Gothic windows on the facade were replaced with the present wood windows with textured glass, and the original wood spire was replaced with a cupola and crescent finial. Next slide. On the interior, the first floor entrance vestibule and meeting hall were reclad with wood panels that were intended to reference the wood mosques found in Lithuania, Belarus, and Poland. These alterations were intentional choices made to mold the original Methodist Church for the religious and cultural traditions of Tatars. The majority of these alterations fall within the period of significance that extends from the 1931 purchase of the mosque by the American Muhammad Society to 1971, the 50-year mark, to reflect the continued use of the mosque. This is also a Columbia student draft. We have received a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. I also want to note that we believe it is worth exploring national significance for this subset of Muslims. Additional research and context, specifically related to the Lipka Tatars in New York, would be needed to see where this may also fit in the nationwide context. That's something we're certainly going to explore, but we wanted to continue this moving forward at the local level. And lastly, we do have Alyssa Howitt. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Alyssa is the caretaker of the mosque. And Alyssa, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you so much for Linda, for everything you've done, and for Claire for helping create this. I really appreciate it. I'm the caretaker of the mosque. I'm also the vice president of the board and descendant. I've been attending this mosque my whole life. My family has been attending this mosque. My grandfather was imam here. So it's hugely significant, and I'm excited about sharing this unique perspective, this story that we have to share, and anything that we can do to preserve the building and the organization. I'm pursuing that as best we can. I'm here now, if you can see that. But I would be happy to answer any questions, but I really appreciate this. We have, there's not many Tatar mosques in the United States. And as Linda mentioned, that my grandparents and that generation had gone through great pains to make this familiar and to make it feel more like home that they were leaving. So it's very unique as far as mosques go in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alyssa. Nicely said. Nicely said. Any other questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
This is Carol, so moved.
Do I have a second?
This is Lucy, second.
Anyone opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Okay, next. The St. Stephen's Mission Church Complex is significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an intact, though modest example of Gothic Revival style religious design in the work of Charles C. Haight, a prominent American architect who practiced in New York City and specialized in buildings for the Episcopal Church. The complex, which currently consists of the church, rectory, and thrift shop, is an architecturally significant ecclesiastical complex in the Woodlawn neighborhood of the Bronx that was established during a period of rapid development of the Woodlawn area at the turn of the 20th century. With this development came the associated establishment of institutions to serve the new population, including religious institutions like St. Stephen's, the oldest church building in continual use in the neighborhood. Next slide. Charles Haight designed several small Episcopal churches, such as St. Stephen's, a building that exemplifies the smaller Gothic Revival parish churches that were popular in more rural locations from the mid-19th into the early 20th century. Gates designed for the building featured rustic wood shingles, an asymmetrical stone chimney, pointed arch entrance and rose window, and a steep gabled roof. Most of the building's original or subsequent historic period features remain intact. The thrift shop, shown on the bottom left, originally a single-family home erected in circa 1897, and the rectory in the lower right, built in 1922, which complete the complex, are representative examples of turn of the century and early 20th century domestic architecture. Next slide. The arched doors, the windows, and the details on the interior are an integral part of the design. The large stained glass windows at the west end over the main altar with elegant color and painting are one of the essential character-defining features of the church. The windows along the nave of the church with their cinquefoil arches are original and were made of opaque glass. Next slide. The period of significance is from 1900, the date of construction for the church, to 1948, when St. Stephen's acquired the building on East 238th Street, used as a thrift shop. The church retains a high degree of integrity to the period of significance and continues to reflect the design intent as a countryside church. This is a Columbia student draft, and we also received a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Any questions or comments?
No questions or comments from the board? Do we have a motion to approve?
This is Carol, so moved.
I will
This
second.
is Jay, I'll second.
Jay, you got the second. Jay DiLorenzo has the second. Any opposed or abstain? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Last but not least in my group, the Vanderbilt Family Cemetery and Mausoleum is significant under Criterion C in the areas of architecture and landscape architecture as a remarkable and highly intact example of integrated landscape and funerary architecture constructed for one of America's premier Gilded Age families to the designs of nationally prominent architect Richard Morris Hunt and landscape architect Frederick Law Olmsted. These resources share salient associations with William Henry Vanderbilt, prominent American businessman and eldest son of Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt, who each at the time of their respective deaths enjoyed the status of being the richest man in America. Next slide. The Vanderbilt Family Cemetery and Mausoleum is a privately owned, roughly rectangular 16-acre parcel adjoining the northwestern end of the Moravian Cemetery, located in the New Dorp neighborhood of Staten Island. The cemetery is accessible via the Moravian Cemetery's Central Avenue through an imposing stone retaining wall and entrance arch with elaborate iron gates that separates the Vanderbilt Cemetery from the publicly accessible Moravian Cemetery. The Vanderbilt family retains ownership of their parcel, while the adjacent 113-acre Moravian Cemetery, founded in 1740, is owned by the local Moravian Church congregation. Next slide. In 1883, William Vanderbilt commissioned Richard Morris Hunt to design his new monumental family mausoleum. In 1886, he hired Frederick Law Olmsted to prepare designs for the cemetery grounds. The commission proved to be one of the earliest successful design collaborations between Hunt and Olmsted, predating the pair's more famous designs for the Biltmore Estate and the 1893 World Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The new mausoleum would supplant the modest tomb that Commodore had built several years earlier prior to his death in 1887, which is located in the adjacent Moravian Cemetery. The new site was far superior to the site of the earlier tomb, and the hilltop site was completely private, which not only provided a high degree of security, it also added to the mausoleum's prestige. The tract also had the advantage of being large enough to accommodate the future burial needs of generations of Vanderbilts. What you see in these photos, you see the arch, the entrance there. On the top left-hand corner that's the terraced area in front of the mausoleum and one of the curved pathways on the lower left. Next slide. In late 19th century America, mausolea were constructed by the upper class primarily as a reflection of their status in society. These leaders of industry prepared for their eventual deaths by commissioning prominent architects to design their grand final resting places in America's fashionable rural cemeteries, where each sought to build a tomb more monumental than their neighbors. America's elite also added elements of security to their eternal palaces, including bronze doors, gates, locks, and even armed guards. These security measures were introduced because of a crime committed when the body of A.T. Stewart was stolen from his crypt and held for a $200,000 ransom. Ultimately, the ransom was paid and Stewart's body remains returned. Hunt designed similar security features for the Vanderbilt Mausoleum, including 22 sets of double bronze gates and 2 sets of single bronze gates. Even with the gates, the heavy limestone door, at a remote location, the Vanderbilt family hired armed security guards for additional protection. Next slide. Following a long-standing family practice begun by Commodore at his original tomb, only those carrying the surname Vanderbilt were permitted to be interred in the mausoleum. Other Vanderbilt descendants, beginning with the 2 elder married daughters of William, along with their respective husbands and children, were buried in their own plots within the family cemetery. This is a couple representative views of the interior of the Vanderbilt Mausoleum. Next slide. The Sylvan landscaped cemetery grounds created by Olmsted were complete with a monumental entrance arch and gate, dramatically curving driveways, and lush plantings that today continue to offer a visually stunning and secluded setting for the graves of several generations of the Vanderbilt family. The period of significance, 1883 to 1922, encompasses the commissioned design and construction of the primary contributing resources and ends the year 6 acres of associated land were sold back to the Moravian Cemetery for its expansion, leaving the nominated 16-acre parcel in its present form. And what we have here on the right is the Sloan Mausoleum, and that is behind the Vanderbilt family plot in the upper left and lower left. That is some of the remaining plantings, original plantings that were selected by Olmsted. We received a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and any questions or comments on the draft?
Questions or comments for Vanderbilt Cemetery? Anyone? Do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Carol, so moved.
This is Wayne. I'll second.
Any abstain or opposed? There being none, the motion carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Linda.
Great, thank you.
All right, I think we're going to move on to our last nomination for the day, and Dan Boggs for the Coast Guard Motor Lifeboat.
All right. The U.S. Coast Guard Motor Lifeboat CG 4300 is a one-of-a-kind prototype motor lifeboat completed in the summer of 1940 at the Coast Guard Yard in Curtis Bay, Maryland, as the Coast Guard's first steel, all-electric welded motor lifeboat. She is nationally significant under Criterion C for her role in the evolution of 20th century marine engineering design. CG 4300 is also nationally significant and eligible for listing under Criterion A, Maritime History, for her long years of search and rescue service. She was built to handle rugged seas and weather conditions, with a high degree of stability, great strength of construction, self-righting, self-bailing, and ice-breaking capabilities. The period of significance begins with her construction in 1940 and ends with her removal from active Coast Guard service in 1979. Next slide. In 1848, with the signing of the Newell Act, the United States Congress appropriated funds to establish unmanned life-saving stations along the New Jersey coast south of New York Harbor, and to provide boats and other necessary equipment. Life-saving stations were loosely administered by the United States Revenue Marine, later renamed United States Revenue Cutter Service, and served by volunteer crews. In the decades following, additional stations were built in other states along the East Coast and Gulf of Mexico, and full-time crews replaced the volunteers. In 1878, the network of life-saving stations was formally organized as a separate agency of the United States Department of Treasury, called the Life Saving Service, and in 1915, the Revenue Cutter Service and Life Saving Service were merged to form the U.S. Coast Guard. Next slide. As their work included rescuing sailors from sinking vessels, this frequently meant going out during the worst storms at sea, demanding specialized boats capable of self-bailing and self-righting. Although improvements were made throughout the 19th century, life-saving boats continued to be dependent on rowers or on sails. However, with the turn of the 20th century, motor lifeboats powered by gasoline engines began to be employed. Next slide. Designed in the mid-1930s, the 36-foot TRS wooden lifeboat shown here was undoubtedly the apex and most successful of traditional wooden designs. However, shortages in material and advances in boating technology late in the decade led the Coast Guard to consider a revolutionary welded steel design. Next slide. CG 4300 has electrically welded galvanized steel framing, decks, and superstructure, and an electrically welded galvanized steel hull. She is a self-righting and self-bailing steel hull motor lifeboat that is 40 feet in overall length. She has a 9-foot, 8.5-inch beam at waterline, a displacement of 25,890 pounds, and a 250-gallon fuel tank. The boat has a longitudinal system of framing and 6 watertight compartments. These are the forepeak with the chain locker, radio room, engine room, fuel tank compartment, survivor's cabin, and the steering compartment or coxswain's flat. Aside from the difference in material, CG 4300's physical arrangement also departed very significantly from the Coast Guard's wooden lifeboats, having the helm and engine room moved forward and the survivor's cabin moved aft. This is a vessel designed for the most rugged service in the worst sea conditions. The robust CG 4300 was even authorized to operate as an icebreaker, shown in the historic photo on the bottom left, something no other motor lifeboat in Coast Guard service has ever been authorized to do. Next slide, please. Despite being nearly 8 decades old, CG 4300 not only remains afloat, but maintains historical integrity to the period of significance of 1940 to 1979. Next slide. CG 4300 retains a high degree of original fabric and retains her appearance, design, and functionality. She has and will continue to evoke a historic sense of the past. Here we see the exterior of the survivor's cabin. Next slide. The little changed interior of the survivor's cabin further illustrates the historic integrity of the boat. Next slide. And here's the coxswain's flat with a door to the right leading down into the engine room. The CG 4300 is powered by a General Motors diesel model 4-71RA engine installed in 1950 as part of a Coast Guard modernization program. It is one of the oldest GM diesels operating today. Next slide. The experimental design of the CG 4300 set the stage for the end of the all-wood lifeboat and the beginning of a new era of steel motor lifeboats. Even though CG 4300 proved to be a reliable life-saving boat design, she remains the only example of her type ever built. The advent of World War II and the subsequent development of wood lamination techniques, coupled with rising steel prices, led to the abandonment of plans to build additional boats of this type. In the 1950s, it was decided to build a new, larger steel motor lifeboat to replace the aging wooden fleet. CG 4300's Coast Guard service consisted of 3 years of sea trials at various stations on the East Coast, 33 years at Plum Island, Wisconsin, and the port of Washington Island in winter, and 3 years at Escanaba, Michigan, aids to navigation station. This pioneering vessel remained in service for a remarkable 39 years, and even today, though privately owned, she functions as a floating museum and Coast Guard auxiliary life-saving boat at USC GAUX Flotilla 2-2, 508 Tohannock Boulevard, Ithaca. This nomination has received letters of support from the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission and the Mayor of the City of Ithaca. Thank you. We have 2 guests present. Brian McCracken, Historic Preservation and Neighborhood Planner, City of Ithaca, and John Freeman, owner of the boat and undertaking its restoration. John has indicated he would be available for questions if you have any.
Questions about the nomination or for the owner? Okay, anybody want to comment about the form from the board? Or do any of the guests want to say anything? Okay, well, I enjoyed this nomination quite a bit. I think it's the first nomination that has the terms puking and dry heaving in the nomination itself. And if you read that harrowing rescue attempt at Lake Michigan, it's quite a thing to read. And so you put this boat in the water upside down and it automatically rights itself.
That's correct.
It's amazing. And how much does it weigh?
I actually don't know that overall.
And it's made of galvanized steel.
Correct.
That's electrically welded. Yeah, super interesting. Really cool nomination. No further questions? Do I hear a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion. Just the last 2 cases that we had show such a range of projects that we deal with, from Vanderbilt's mausoleum to a Coast Guard rescue ship. I think it's great.
Yeah, I totally agree. Does somebody want a second? I certainly do. So I'll second this motion and ask for opposition or abstention from the board. There being none, this passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, Dan.
Doug, very quickly, Doug, this is
Yeah.
James Carter. I think John Freeman might be trying to say something. His
Oh, yeah,
microphone.
great. Oh, absolutely. Well, let's take the time to hear that.
I would just like to particularly thank Dan for all of the work he put in to clear up the nomination that I initially gave him. I'm a historian, but I'm not a great writer. And I certainly don't understand the National Register nomination process. The one thing I will add that Dan had asked me about, and I've just gotten some information on, was the architect of this boat. It's a man named Alfred Hansen, and he was a senior architect for the engineering department at the headquarters of the U.S. Coast Guard in Washington, D.C. And he started there in the early 1920s and designed the first boat he's credited with designing is the shallow draft motorboat that they used in Boston and in Kentucky. They only built 2 of them in 1926. And then he was actually the principal naval architect for the 36-foot Type T motor lifeboat, which was that wooden motor lifeboat that was in service for so many years between the Type Ts and TRs and TRSs from the 1930s to the 1960s. But it's interesting that he then designed this 40-foot steel motor lifeboat to replace them. So Alfred Hansen covered the whole evolution of single-engine motor lifeboats for the Coast Guard.
Nice. Great. Thank you, John. The other nice thing about this nomination is having the historical context and description of all the agencies and entities that led up to the formation of the Coast Guard. So that was really nice as well.
Yeah.
Any abstained or opposed? We had a first and a second, correct? All right, the motion carries by unanimous consent.
Doug, this is Daniel McKay. Can I just offer, I want to congratulate both the sponsor and boat owner for bringing this to us. It's such a unique addition to the National Register program in New York State. And your caretaking and stewardship and investment in this vessel is notable and kind of fun to see in interior New York as opposed to coastal New York. But thanks for making it possible. And then Dan Boggs, you know, obviously a significant listing for New York State, but this is, you know, this is a typology that, you know, this nomination actually has, I think, will have national interest as others find their way to it. So once again, a good, you know, proclaiming good territory here in New York. So good stuff. Thanks all.
And the significance is national, not local, as is indicated on the chart. So, and nationally significant for both of the NR criteria. All right, that's the end of the National Register nominations, as the slide indicates. Moving on the agenda items to new business and a couple situations of recognition. Michael, can I assume that you're going to take the lead here?
If you'd like me to, Doug, yes, I can.
That would be great.
The first is a board resolution recognizing the outstanding contributions of Paul Stewart, who recently submitted his resignation from this board. Dated today, June 10th. Whereas Paul Stewart has long been a strong and consistent voice for historic preservation statewide and within his community, and whereas Paul was the moving force behind the creation of the Underground Railroad Museum at the Stephen and Harriet Meyer residence in Albany, and whereas Paul has served on this board with distinction since June 2010, where he has participated in the work of this board, considering the merits of over 650 National Register nominations. And whereas Paul has brought his perspective on traditionally underrepresented communities to his work on the board and provided insight to the staff preparing nominations, especially sites associated with African American history, including burial grounds, churches, free Black settlements, and clubs. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the New York State Board for Historic Preservation commends Paul Stewart for his distinguished service to the board, for his commitment to the advancement of historic preservation in New York State, and to keeping alive the history of the Underground Railroad.
Thank you, Michael.
We'll entertain a motion and a second to that. And if it's approved, then Doug, I'll send you a hard copy for your signature.
Excellent. I certainly will move approved. Do we hear a second?
Absolutely. It's Erica Krieger.
Any opposed or abstained? The motion carries with unanimous support. I look forward to signing that. And we have another recognition to do here today. Is it presumptuous of me to think that Wint would like to take the lead on this one?
No, it is not presumptuous.
All right. Wint, would you be willing to take on the John Bonafide recognition?
I don't know if Wint's here anymore. Oh, he's trying to unmute himself.
Oh.
Did Wint fail?
No, he's
Wint is trying to unmute himself.
I'm in Wint. I see a muted Wint and an unmuted Wint. Actually, I see two muted Wints and one unmuted in the list of participants. Okay, are we going to need a plan B here?
Plan B is me.
That's okay. You're a good plan B, Michael.
A resolution introduced on June 10th, commending John Anthony Bonafide for exemplary service to the people of the state of New York and to the cause of historic preservation. And I'll warn you, this is a long one because John's been with us for over 30 years. Whereas this board wishes to honor John Anthony Bonafide on the occasion of his retirement from the post of Director, Technical Preservation Services Bureau of the Division for Historic Preservation, and pay tribute to his almost 34 years of talented and devoted service to the people of the state of New York and the cause of historic preservation. And whereas he served 2 years as municipal historian for the town of New Baltimore, where his work in the field of history and historic preservation began. And whereas he began his service in the State Historic Preservation Office in the National Register Unit, during which time he appeared frequently before this very board, writing over 500 nominations, adding historic properties and historic districts to the state and national registers, for which he received an Achievement Award from the Board for Historic Preservation in 2000. And whereas John, as Information Systems Manager, led the effort to create Sphinx, New York's first online accessible compliance project review tracking system, using a fully integrated Windows-based information system for which he received an Agency Distinguished Service Award in 2006. And whereas he was part of the team that upgraded our Geographic Information System capability, that resulted in the Cultural Resources Information System, known as CRIS, a state-of-the-art online database system by which we manage our inventory of over 319,000 highly accurate, geo-referenced building, district, archaeological, and submerged unique resources, all of our compliance reviews numbering 15 to 19,000 a year, and all certified rehabilitation tax credit projects are tracked, for which John and the CRIS team received an Agency Special Achievement Award in 2014. And whereas for more than 17 years, John has headed the technical review and archaeology functions of the division, first as coordinator, and for the past 10 years as director of the Technical Preservation Services Bureau. And whereas he has demonstrated time and again his deep understanding and mastery of the federal, state, and local rules, laws, and regulations that govern the work of the division, resulting in many programmatic agreements, memoranda of agreement, and letters of resolution designed to mitigate the often competing goals of preservation and other public benefits. And whereas John has served ably as the Agency Historic Preservation Officer for the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and in that role developed policies and procedures that have been duly adopted by the agency. And whereas he has dedicated countless hours sharing his professional expertise as a respected educator in SUNY Albany's public history program, and whereas John has frequently put his bachelor's degree in fine arts to use in the division's annual holiday baking competition, crafting gingerbread creations peopled with recognizable staff dough dolls. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the New York State Board for Historic Preservation hereby recognizes with gratitude the decades of devoted public service performed by John Anthony Bonafide, that we celebrate his accomplishments as described above, and that we wish him health and a long, productive life in retirement with the hope that he continues to share his expertise and interest in researching, writing, publishing, and teaching another generation of historians. I'll entertain a motion to move that resolution.
It looks like Wint is trying to participate here. Wint, you're muted or turned way down.
This is Erica. I'll make the motion if we need somebody to.
Oh, we certainly do. And
On the condition I get a gingerbread cookie next.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, Wint is trying to participate. I still can't hear him.
Yeah, I think Wint gets the motion and we'll grant Erica the second.
I think that's a good way to do it, and it's certainly well deserved. Any abstain or opposed to that motion? There being none, it carries by unanimous consent. Thank you, Michael.
Well, I believe John has been listening in to his final State Review Board meeting, and he might want to make a few comments himself. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks to the board for the resolution. Appreciate it. It's rare that in state service, one can have an opportunity to do something one really appreciates and loves to do. I don't think there are many state employees that have the opportunities that we at the State Historic Preservation Office have, or that have been afforded to me over 33 years, the chance to wander through historic buildings, or in my younger days, crawl through them. The ability to, go to places, see sites, meet people, work with architects from around the world as part of our compliance program, all of which is just part of coming into work every day, or coming into People's Island and standing next to Church's Petra, or, the works that are on the tables there being worked on every day. It's truly a remarkable opportunity for all of us who work at the division, but have been particularly important for me as an artist, as a historian. When I started here in '87, it was not a place I thought, I would last very long. And I guess it did work out. I'll point out that my first presentation to this board was December of 1987, and it was the Berkeley Square Historic District in Saranac Lake, where I first met Mary Hotelling, who was the director of Historic Lake and later a member of the board, who I, before she became a member of the board, forced to go out in a snowstorm to measure the depths of buildings so I would have an accurate map for the board to look at when we presented it on top of the Twin Towers in Albany, in a very nice glass conference room that was truly non-historic, but certainly an auspicious setting for the first nomination. And my last official nomination was the Rapp Road District, written through the remarkable research of Jennifer Lemack. Just a remarkable and seminal work on the Great Migration period, where I met just some remarkable people who live and cherish that district. And that was presented in Gardner Earl Memorial Chapel and Crematorium in Oakwood Cemetery in Troy. So an interesting set of bookends to that part of my career. But it has been a pleasure, and I will encourage the board. I know 4 times a year you see the best of what the National Register program produces, and you get to meet some remarkable historians who work in that program. But I've had the pleasure for, decades to work with kind of the other side of the program. You often don't see our technical reviewers and our archaeology staff, who truly are remarkable people, who are dedicated and hardworking and masterful at what they do. And it would be wonderful if once the board's meeting again in person, if you all get to meet that staff and maybe expand the agenda to talk about some of the work they're doing as well on a regular basis. It truly helps to round out the sheer volume and mastery of preservation that exists at People's Island with the State Historic Preservation Office. With that, I'm probably going to hang up my gingerbread house work for a while. I hope to stay involved in preservation, working with local historical groups and not-for-profits to help them with other questions about historic preservation and how to find their way through some of the harder aspects of environmental reviews they may have to do. And it has been a true privilege to work for this office. I've never taken it for granted a day in my life, and always knew how lucky I have been to have served in one place for 34 years of a career. And while difficult and taxing and occasionally frustrating, as all jobs are, every day offered a new opportunity and a new challenge, most of them exciting and good. And it's allowed me to work with some remarkable, truly remarkable staff and individuals over my career. And I'm grateful for that. So thank you for the resolution. I thank the board for supporting my work when I was in the National Register program and beyond as I brought things to your attention. I wish you all well as time goes on. And again, it's been a true privilege and honor to work for this office. And I thank the 6 commissioners and 4 deputies I've had the privilege to work with over the years for their support. And hopefully we'll run into you all post-retirement. Thank you all.
Thanks, John. Nice. Wint, is there any chance that we can hear you?
I don't know what's gone wrong. I can see him trying to talk, but
Yeah.
it won't. Yeah.
You can't unmute his other entrances in the list of participants?
No, unfortunately, it lets me, so I can only request that people unmute themselves to prevent me unmuting them while they're doing, you know what I mean, to cause an issue.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. There seems to have been something wrong because over the course of the meeting, I saw him join several times. So there must be some sort of device error or something like that.
All right. We have a final piece of new business to attend to, and that's just a review of the remaining dates for 2021 State Review Board meetings. Those are September 9th and December 9th. Do we have any discussion about those, or do any board members have any problems attending on those dates, operating on the assumption that we may be attending in person? Okay.
Well, Doug, I'd remind the board that in past years, we've usually tried to schedule one of the board meetings at a remote location somewhere other than People's Island. But I would suggest that till we get back into the routine, that the September 9th and December 9th meetings be held at People's Island. The December meeting is usually the one at which the State Historic Preservation Awards are announced.
Right.
But as we saw last year, that got rescheduled based on the governor's preferred schedule. So at this point, I would suggest People's Island for September 9th and People's Island for December 9th. And we can revisit the December location at the September meeting.
Excellent. That sounds great. I agree. And maybe we could take up John's suggestion of meeting with the staff at some point at one of those meetings as well. All right, that concludes our business. Does anyone have any other items of new business to bring our attention to? Or no old business to take care of? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Carol Clark, so moved.
Second?
I second. This is Kristen.
Anyone opposed to adjourning? I guess we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.